What is going on, everyone? I cannot remember the last time I have done this, as it always takes forever for me to get all the images situated and kind of determine which lists I want to put on here, etc, etc, etc. But we are going through the entirety of Premiere, 72 different leaders, and even more so than that, not only are we going through the leaders, but we're also specifically talking about the deck combinations. Now, I do leader tier lists every once in a while, usually once during the set. But in this case, we are doing a deck tier list, which means what you might see, for example, some of these recent leaders, multiple images of them, because these are different aspect combinations they're running. So it is a deck tier list. Now, every leader within Premiere has at least one deck on the list, some of which actually are putting up results in multiple different aspects, will have multiple. So before I dive in and talk about the tiers for this list, and of course, some things to think about, some disclaimers before I get roasted in the comment section, a huge thank you to my patrons over on Patreon, as, well, it's always motivating when you all are able to support the channel, and I can set aside, 4 or 5 hours to get this list together, which is a lot of fun. So thank you so much. So let's talk about the tiers here and a little bit about the list. It's really, really important to note that, we have, in a lot of cases, a lot of lists that just don't really, in my opinion, deserve to be on here. Really, some leaders are just D and C tier, which are going to be the tiers that are either super niche specific, where like this might work in like once in a blue moon and win you a game, or maybe their just ability just doesn't do enough, or their deck cohesion just works better with a different leader as the head of it, or it's just straight up bad. Like it's just, it's tried to be played and it just is not performing at all. And therefore, they're just kind of on the list because it's the only deck that they have. And so this is the best option you have, but it's just not exactly conducive to success. You do have the B tiers, which are going to be more of your, what I consider store showdown. What that means is something that's semi-competitive. You could bring to a competitive tournament. You can take down the top 8, maybe even win the whole thing. And we see these lists pop up every once in a while, but they're not necessarily extremely consistent, or maybe their power level is just a little bit weaker than those in the A and S tier. A and S tier lists, these are going to be your competitive lists. You bring any of these to a tournament and you actually have a pretty good shot at taking down the whole thing. S tier ones, these are going to be the ones that are obviously the decks to beat. When you are constructing a list, you are thinking of these 5 to 10 different lists in S tier and building your sideboard around them, and even your main deck around them. If you do not have a plan for these, there is not even basically a reason to build your deck. And a lot of the times, the only decks that are in A and even in some cases B tier are decks that can have a game plan up against the S tier ones. And that's kind of what differentiates the bottom feeders from the top. Those are the tiers. Let's start out with each different set. I've broken up into sets. I did not do it in order. It's just kind of how it shook out when I uploaded the images. So I apologize, but there are going to be timestamps below. And I'll try to put images up on screen for you all so you guys can follow along. Let's get into it. Alrighty, well, we get to head into our very first set, which is going to be Secrets of Power. This is set 6, the one that came in just before rotation. And we had a couple of interesting ones in here, including dual aspect leaders, which are a dual aspect leader, which was a kind of a fun little introduction before we got the multi-aspect leaders in set 7. So there's definitely some uniqueness here. And we get to start off with Dryden. It's always difficult to place the first leaders as we get more on the list and kind of do some comparisons between the two. I think some shape out a little bit ahead of others. So keep that in mind as things might shift as we move further and further into the video. But Dryden Blue. This is certainly the strongest variant of Dryden. I've played a lot of different variants. Dryden Yellow. I've tried Double Green Dryden. Dryden Yellow I played for a video. Dryden Blue, really the strength lies in the ability to have some really, really powerful force combination plays with Dryden. Lots of very, very powerful ambushing units, or units that can be ambushed through his ability. And that's really what keeps you alive, is even though you have a late to deploy and a late game kind of game plan, the ambush ability really, really helps you out. Now, I will say sometimes you do struggle against some space decks because a lot of the force-based mechanics are relegated to the ground arena because there's not a force-based like space units oftentimes. You do have like ambushing out Anakins and ambushing out Darth Vaders, which are really good because Anakin can pair well with discarding Yodas to get you that double trigger. And Darth Vader being ambushed out, well, we already know how strong that is from Legends of the Force. I think Dryden is a great example of one of those store showdown decks where, you know, he did sneak in a win and does perform pretty admirably. I don't know if he's quite into the A tier. I think you could argue for a low A tier or a high B tier. At the current moment, I will keep him in the low or high B tier, not the low A tier. Next up, we've got Slimemoor. This is a leader that we got to sneak a little bit of games or see a little bit of games show up in the previous set when set 6 was still alive. People were trying the Slimemoor Data Vault, which is, in my opinion, one of the stronger variants. You do have a nice leader deploy with the ability to kind of deal some damage to some random units out there. I don't really find the ability to generate a bunch of spy tokens to be all that relevant. So that's a little bit unfortunate for Slimemoor's case. We're not really seeing them pop up anywhere. You know, unlike Dryden here, Slimemoor, you know, it does have the occasional, you know, position that people are playing in some of these competitive tournaments. But we're talking about like less than 1%. And, you know, the performance is really not there. The fact that you can play Data Vault is a big bonus. 3 extra HP is really, really nice. But the overall effectiveness of the leader is just not quite there to, in my opinion, put it above C tier. And I'm going to be honest, guys. We got C-3PO. We're just going to... Okay. Do we need to talk about C-3PO anymore? I mean, this guy's a 1/6. 1/6. There's not... I mean, there's like... If you look at the meta, there's one dude that's played C-3PO and has tried to do anything with him. And you know what? What happened? Yeah, it got absolutely annihilated. 30% win rate. And they didn't even play that many games. Yeah, pretty mediocre, terrible stat line on the leader deploy, an ability that's like too action intensive. You have to have an exhausted unit to go ahead and trigger it. Yeah, we don't even need to talk about C. He might be like the worst leader. Like, okay, we'll move on. Next up, we've got Mon Mothma. This one's an interesting one. So Mon Mothma, I think the best version is in Vigilance. Now, this one is a little bit tricky as with the introduction of the new bases, you can kind of make a very, very fun list come together. One of the things that I think is the strongest thing to do with Mon Mothma, and you'll find that quite a few decks actually follow this game plan, because one of the ways to win with any deck is to use Unity of Purpose. Unity of Purpose with any deck can eventually win if you just play a bunch of units and then play Unity of Purpose. That can just win you the game. But Mon Mothma and some leaders are specifically good with it, as this allows you to play like a ton of different officials, and more importantly, the flip side of Mon Mothma, giving them extra tankiness, allows them to survive more so than maybe some other leaders would. So I do enjoy playing Mon Mothma with Unity of Purpose, but I find Vigilance to be pretty strong, especially since you could start off with like Han Solo, some other officials like Populist Advisor, which is pretty nice to pair with your other one drop. Again, because Unity of Purpose is on the horizon. Cards like Lats is really, really nice, especially in order to not get completely overwhelmed or get all your units killed by just a really strong unit. These are all very good plays, and guess what? Well, because we are in the set where we have those splash bases, we can play Mon Mothma and still play Unity of Purpose on those 6 resources. I don't think Mon Mothma is particularly strong. Definitely not, really on the same level as like Dryden. I think you could end up like low B tier. I'm gonna actually put her in high C tier at the current moment, because I really don't think Mon Mothma is anything special. On another note, we got Sabe next up, and Sabe has popped up quite a bit here in the previous meta and in this meta, she still is hanging in there in terms of popularity and people bringing her to the table. I almost put a second variant of her deck on here because we do have Sabe Green, which is by far the more popular one, but there is a small remnant of Sabe Red where you do get some other cards that are pretty strong, even some sideboard options that are really nice against some of the S tier decks, which I'm sure we're going to get to here. So yeah, certainly some strong potential options, but I do think Sabe Green with Data Vault is the way to go. Again, the extra HP is just so critical. And you also get to play around with some really nice new additions like Jhin. Millennium Falcon can be a very strong play. And against some of the decks that have a little bit more of a controlling element, you do have like that Chewbacca, I just kill you very quickly because I'm attacking for 6 on turn 2, right? That can do some major work. Sabe coming in 4/6, on the attack, being able to mess with your opponent's hand, that can be extremely relevant for some of the decks that, don't quite deploy until the 6th turn, or 5th turn rather, on their 6th resource. I think Sabe definitely earns an A tier. I don't know if it's really quite on the higher end. There are a lot of lists that, in my opinion, like some leaders that are an S tier and they just kind of dominate the S and higher echelons of A tier. But I think Sabe definitely has a contention for some of the higher points of A tier. So we'll leave her there for now. DJ, this is a leader that really has not shown up like anywhere. A lot of people have tried and messed around with different combinations. I think the one that I've found the most success with, since there's not really any data on a DJ out there, is DJ Red. I mean, there's not even a single report of people really playing these lists in like just any of the tournaments. I've looked at data for top 8s. I've looked at data just for people submitting lists, etc. And yeah, you just don't really see a whole lot of people playing DJ entirely because it's just kind of what I would consider, and I've used this term a lot, a dirtly list where you're kind of doing all these things to try to set up a nice play, get some discounts, and it just doesn't do a whole lot. Now, Twin Suns on the other hand, but yeah, I think DJ gonna go in the D tier. I think his ability is really just too convoluted and messy for you to get enough value to make it worth it at the moment. If we get some really powerful when played effects that make it worth it, maybe we got something there, or some synergy with capture, etc. Next up, we've got Padme. Padme is quite interesting. No Tarkin Town to mess around with these days, but certainly something that is done pretty well. Padme Red, you've got some more disclosing cards, you've got some more ways to trigger it, and really because a lot of the previous sets have rotated out, and this I'm sure will be a common topic going forward, but because a lot of other previous solid cards have rotated out, you're now defaulting to some cards that now have some pretty powerful strength, like Charge with Treason, for example. It's not a card we were playing at all, but now it is, and it works perfectly with Padme, and cards like that are very frequent to show up. And she is played quite a bit. I do find that, she ends up being a pretty decently synergistic deck, especially with the pinging effect. The problem is that pinging effect just ends up being a lot weaker now. The deck, the games aren't really decided by a bunch of like really cheap units that are getting down and coming in and smashing your face. It's a lot of those 6-drop leaders that kill you on that turn when they deploy, and Padme just can't really quite interact with them all that well. I think she solidifies herself in the B tier. Again, similar to Dryden, I think you could argue for the low A tier components of this, but we will see how full those tiers are as we get closer to it. Next up, we got Daedra. Now, this one was kind of tricky. I was debating on whether or not to go with like Daedra yellow or Daedra blue, but I should say whether to put Daedra yellow on the list. Daedra blue was, of course, one that I had to show up with because that is the more popular one by far, but it's actually been performing quite exceptionally well. And it's not really too big of a surprise because who would have guessed the deck that can innately draw a lot of cards end up being pretty good with something like Aggressive Negotiations, but also you have a very nice controlling deck. You've got things like Single Reactor Ignition, Condemn, big burn effects like that, ability to draw cards, and then you have that like X factor of being able to just win the game with Aggressive Negotiations. Because you deploy so early, you have a control deck that is actually able to end the game pretty quickly. And that's something that's super useful. especially since this deploys on 4 resources, and oftentimes you'll have more cards than your opponent. 4 damage a turn, boom, 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 can really end the game. And especially when you're dealing with like Boba Fett's or Luke's in that 6 resource realm, the fact that you have pressure on them and can actually end the game is very, very important. She definitely earns an A tier, and I think above Sabe as well. I think she definitely breaks into the higher echelons of A tier. But we will, again, see as we get deeper into the video here. Next up, we've got Bail Organa. This one has been pretty tricky. I know some people that are super, super high on this guy, or were. Again, we don't see this guy anywhere. We just don't see him show up. I put a double green Bail on here because while you can go ahead and play like a splash base with Bail, similar to Mon Mothma, I prefer just to go straight to double green, as you can utilize command pretty relatively well. And you don't have that same, I can just kind of play the splash base and survive with my higher statted leader because you have a 3/3 that is being deployed. That said, I mean, I think generally speaking, where you're winning is unity of purpose. That's how a lot of games are decided, is unity of purpose with some of these weird lists is, I'll just go ahead and kind of play units and hope to win that way. That said, Bail Organa, not really anything going for him. I don't feel like he should be above the D tier mark. I don't see his stat line being all that good. I don't see his ability being all that relevant. And, you're just way outclassed by so many different units and leaders out there. Continuing on, we've got Governor Pryce, which, is a little bit of an interesting one. Haven't really seen her at all since set 6 with the introduction of Governor Pryce. A lot of people just try out new leaders when they're released. That's just kind of how it goes. Same thing's going to happen with a lot of the set 7 leaders that we're talking about. They're not necessarily strong. It's just people are trying to make them work. Now, Governor Pryce, the strongest thing that I've been able to do with her in Data Vault, that is, because of the extra HP really, is go ahead and drop in a Vader pilot on some sort of token in space. And so you can double trigger or use her action to double trigger Vader in a single turn, which is honestly pretty strong. I mean, that can do some work and can end the game quickly. The problem is that's super inconsistent and super disruptible, especially in the current iteration. Being able, using some sort of token and pumping them up and trying to get multiple attacks in is just not going to happen in the world of Axe Forgets, Beguiles. I can go on and on with disruption pieces. The actual stat line of leader 4/6 on 6 is just not exciting. And then on top of all that, you, even though can have potentially a very, very high powered leader unit when it comes down, it's just not how it ends up being. There's just not enough tokens to really make that worthwhile. And then generating tokens on attack just doesn't do a whole lot. It's just a little too slow for what you want to be doing. And then the leader ability doesn't allow you to enable that game plan. I think she ends up being a C tier option. I'm actually going to move these guys around. I think this is probably how I'll shape it up to be in the C tier. Next up, we've got Chancellor Palpatine. This one has always been one that I've tried to mess around with, simply because the idea of jumping in and deploying your leader and then deploying 17 units afterwards is always exciting. Plot cards typically are honestly kind of weak. There really isn't a whole lot of very, very strong plot options. You got Sudden Ferocity out there. You've got Chancellor Palpatine. And those are the 2 main ones. We occasionally see Dracelian Commandos and such. But the rest of the plot cards, what ends up happening is they're a little overcost for what they're doing. And the same thing applies to Sudden Ferocity even. 3 resources or +3/+0 upgrade is not great. The only reason it's useful is because it's kind of drawing a card and an immediate action sheet. That's the strength, and getting a little bit of versatility at your resources. But building your whole game plan around kind of this plot mechanic can be a little bit sketchy because they cost so much that you don't actually get a whole lot of value when you deploy Palpatine. We really aren't seeing a whole lot of him. I think Data Vault is the best option. You do get some pretty solid plot options in there, like I said, Chancellor Palpatine earlier. And I also think that one of the other kind of interesting additions, not that you can necessarily draw it, but because you're drawing extra cards with your action here on the front side, I have been including 1 to 2 copies of Aggressive Negotiations. Pretty common that you'll see across a lot of decks. And kind of ending the game with that, because he does have a nice stat line when you do deploy him, so not too bad in that regards. I think I'm going to put him at the bottom of B tier, maybe even a high C tier. Again, this guy's just not really showing up anywhere. at the current moment, and I don't find him to be particularly strong, but I think he could be somewhere in the low to mid B tier. Next up, we've got Luthen. This one, actually just made a video on this guy. Luthen, unfortunately, has never really been worthwhile. The fact that you kind of get some extra damage in when you attack units and having your units die on attack is decent. It's really, really good when it comes to Sentinels. That's where Luthen's ability truly shines. With, let's say, Droid Laser Turret or like Captain Typho, suddenly your 4-powered units can actually trade with those Sentinels when a Sentinel might be able to just stonewall you. And that's something that is a nice little advantage with Luthen. But unfortunately, if all you're doing is hitting their units, you're actually missing out on damage into the base. So really the strength of this action comes from when your opponent is relying on those Sentinels. And realistically, these days, while Sentinels are a small component, like you still do have Captain Typho, you have the occasional Lando, you've got the droid laser turrets, sure. But the decks that are really popular aren't really relying on those. It's going to be bounce effects. And Luthen's ability just doesn't do anything. And he's a 2/7 on 5, which is a little bit less aggressive, even though he can really ramp up the amount of damage you're getting from the units with the 2 damage instead of the 1 damage and multiple triggers. The best card in this deck really that I've seen is like a Padme or a Queen Amidala, I should say, where you got the 5 resource, 5/3, and then you can kind of sacrifice those spy tokens in for a little bit of chunks of damage into your opponent's units, and you don't even need to hit their base. Again, that's when it comes to Sentinels. Because otherwise, I mean, what's the difference between hitting a Sentinel and then hitting their base? None. It's just the fact that the Sentinel prevents you from hitting the base. So you get a little bit extra damage there. I think he ends up in B tier. I think he's a little bit weaker than Palpatine. Again, another one that doesn't really show up and put up any results. So Data Vault is the deck of choice, in my opinion. I do think you could go with Cunning and play like Jyn and Millennium Falcon, but 3 extra HP is a lot, and you do get a lot of solid units in Data Vault that you otherwise would not. The other portion of this that I think Luthen's ability is really strong with is like the ambushers, like Blue Leader and stuff that might immediately die, but take something with it. That way you get immediate damage into their base. But I digress. Next up, we've got Cassian. This one, a little bit different, but kind of a similar vein as Luthen. You have like a very similar game plan that you want to go with, which is I'm going to play a bunch of rebel units in my deck, and I'm going to try to hit you and just win the game, right? And Cassian's case, you do have some pretty strong options because you just want to hit their base. You don't even care about your units dying on attack or anything like Luthen does. This one, I do tend to go with Data Vault because you do want to get to 6 resources with Cassian, and it can be a little bit tricky if you're not running Data Vaults to do so. So I think that's super important. I don't really think you can go with any other base because of that. But also, as with Luthen, there are a lot of very strong heroism rebel command units that you want to run. Cassian does allow you to work with some units that might do some direct damage into their base, which is kind of interesting. But you've lost a couple units that you had from previous rotation. The rebel synergy with Cassian, like Fleet Lieutenant, Fighters for Freedom was really good because you could just play a unit and then your Fighters for Freedom would not be able to be attacked, which is really nice. And that ended up being pretty strong. I think Cassian actually is one of those leaders that got a good amount weaker from rotation just by nature of losing out a lot of the elements that made him quite strong. I do think he's a little bit better than Luthen, but I think they're actually quite similar game plans. Luthen has the advantage up against Sentinels, and then Cassian has the advantage when it comes to, maybe people trying to lean into ambushers or just units that are trying to trade off. Again, another one hasn't really shown up a whole lot at all. Jabba. Now, this is the first one on this list that actually has no, if you notice, little side edges, because all these have like green and then blue or red, right? This one, Lake Country. That's what it refers to, for those of you that are curious. So we've got Lake Country Jabba. This one is not the new Jabba, not from set 7. This one's the one from set 6 here. And we've got a leader that really gets a ton of advantage from trying to hit your units. And this one's actually been popping up quite a bit compared to what I expected to happen. This is actually one of the most popular decks. I shouldn't say one of the most popular. One of the more popular decks. Like, we're talking like top 15, top 20 in terms of popularity, and it performs quite excellently. I've played many different variations of Jabba because I think Jabba is extremely fun. The flip side of Jabba is really what you're looking for, and if you're able to keep Jabba alive, that flip side can be absolutely game crushing. When you're in a situation where your opponent's playing a lot of space units and you've got like a couple of space ambushers, so one ambusher can be responsible for, well, not only having your unit stay alive and preventing some damage, but also killing like 2 of theirs. And that can be really disgusting. And of course, because you're just trying to get to Jabba flip and then stay alive and then draw these ambushers, Lake Country works perfectly, especially since there's a lot of the colorless ambushers, and like Fett's Fire Spray, the new one, this is the perfect location for it. You've got some of the main ambushers that you're looking for already, which is really, really important. Now, I do think there might be a conversation, and I could have put Jabba Yellow on this list as well, but if you actually look at the decks that are being played, Lake Country is one of the more common ones. Jabba Yellow is... Man, Jabba Yellow has been doing well, and it is more popular than Jabba Lake Country, but Jabba Lake Country has actually performed better. You know, maybe I'll pause the video and drop in Jabba Cunning, because I do think if I'm going to put Lake Country on here, I think Jabba Yellow should also be on here. So I'll be right back. 1 second. All right. Despite the higher performance from Jabba Lake Country that has been existing, it wouldn't be right to have the Jabba Yellow omitted from the list. So we got to include him. Jabba Lake Country, I think, is actually just an A-tier list. It's actually been very, very strong. And I think Jabba Cunning is right behind it. Jabba Cunning, you're going to find yourself in a spot where you've got like really, really nice ambushers for the ground arena, mainly is where this comes in. Now, in space, you still have like the retrofitted airspeeder, which is really, really nice. It's that can be ground unit, but definitely hits those space units and shrinks them down for you to be pretty advantageous. Also, the Jabba Cunning does have access to like cards like the Stranger, as an example, and some Sentinels, like some lists play like Qui-Gon and such. So yes, certainly powerful, both of them, and you know, Jabba in general is the reason as to why it truly is a strong contender. And you know, I think it wouldn't be right. It wouldn't be right for all of those that were raging there, like, wait, where's my Jabba Cunning? You are right. I totally have to include the Jabba Cunning if I'm going to put Jabba Lake Country on the list, because Jabba Cunning is by far the more popular option. But like I said, performing similarly, but Lake Country's actually taken some higher spots. So if you wanted to argue that Cunning is better than Lake Country, I could see the argument. I personally have found that to be the case, but I'm going to put my personal experience aside in terms of the results that Lake Country has had. We also have a little bit smaller sample size with this, so maybe it's just an outlier. But continue on. We've got Lama Su next up. Lama Su, this one, very, very upgrade focused, kind of an awkward list with the sort of upgrades that you're going to be utilizing. Kind of interesting because you do get the discount with upgrades. You don't do damage to your units, which honestly can be a positive, since, you know, some of these are grit based or, you know, synergistic with some damage being dealt to them. I'm thinking like Zam Wessel as an example, or like the Lost Jedi, which I've played in there, or like Lobot as an example, all of which are cards that you might play with Lama Su. The problem is that upgrades are just not well positioned in the meta at all. We have so much main deck upgrade hate at this point, like System Shocks being played main deck, Outer Rim Constables kind of everywhere. And you still have a lot of bounce effects, and bounce effects are devastating for upgrades. You've just used all your resources on this unit to get in some extra damage, and the bounce just gets rid of it. So, I mean, Lama Su, unfortunately, I think just based on where the meta is at, I think Lama Su ends up in C tier. It's a very fun list, and this is one, you know, unlike maybe some of these other ones on C and D tier, people try to make work really, really hard. And, you know, it can be strong. It can be strong if your opponent doesn't have those pieces of interaction that I'm mentioning, because you could just load up a unit and your opponent might just get completely dominated by it. However, that's not commonly what ends up happening. We've got Leia next up, which is an interesting one. This is actually one that has shown up more and more the disclose to get an experience token has always been, well, I shouldn't say disclose specifically, but the one resource action to get an experience token has always been something that we've seen and been on the lookout for. We've had different iterations of this. We've had like Tarkin doing it. We have Snoke doing it. We've had Rey in the past. We have Leia, all of which have their different restrictions, whether it's unit type, aspect type, having a required aspect in your hand, or a certain size of unit. In this case, it's really about deck construction and what you have in your hand versus what you can play. And, having that extra resource to get some little bit of incidental value here and there is very, very powerful. Now, Leia, there really is one major deck that is being played, and that's Data Vault, pretty much exclusively. And really, this just comes down to utilizing a lot of the strong Vigilance command cards. As I remind you, the really strong Vigilance command cards, such as like Han Solo, Leppy Lookout, or cards like your Lats, all of which are typically played. And then what's interesting about it is you've got cards like Sabine's Masterpiece, Moral Authority in the deck, or Gungan Warrior, which might seem a little bit odd because you are in a situation where Leppy Lookout, Han Solo, Lats, all those cards don't have heroism, but rather command and cunning. The mono heroism cards are the cards that actually you use to pump up those units. So you still actually have the ability to go ahead and take advantage of that. So it's not just, I've got to match my my heroism / vigilance cards with just the command cards, etc. You also have some new additions like Nothing Left to Fear, which is really, really good. This list has actually been pretty solid. It's been pretty solid. And I think where do we put her? I mean, she's shown up pretty decently and has done some decent work. She's definitely, maybe we move these two around, put Dryden a little bit lower than Padme. And I think Leia fits above Padme. Maybe low A tier, high B tier. Dryden is definitely closer to the tier of like Chancellor Palpatine than Padme, to be honest. So I think that's what we'll drop her for the current moment. We've got Satine next up, and I'll say this one is always one that everyone tries to play because it's such like a meme. You've got, a 0-powered leader. Let's get it. And every single time I've seen it played, it just gets rolled. 0-powered leaders, horrible. Like the ability to heal some of your units is actually not a bad ability. 2 damage to heal up from a unit. We've seen like healing abilities like Obi-Wan in the past, for example, actually do not too bad, right? The problem is that you just don't have a leader. Now, against some matchups, this doesn't matter as much. Like, a perfect example of this is some of the like racing space matchups. Like sometimes you can take advantage of all the healing, and then your opponent can't deal with Satine specifically because they're more focused on the space arena, and then you just get a free restore 4 every single turn, and maybe you drop an upgrade on her, like I don't know, but like Yoda's lightsaber on something. Not that you're gonna get the trigger on that, but it's kind of awkward. I've seen Data Vault versions with like lack of force, and I've also seen the force versions where you are trying to play like Yoda, Owen, have a bunch of force cards in your deck, utilize the force trigger. To be honest, this really comes down to you just don't have enough board presence to stay alive. It's not like absolutely the worst, but I would definitely kind of put her in the C tier category. Even though it's played more than a lot of these C tier decks, it has performed worse than a lot of these C tier decks. So we're going to put her at the bottom of C tier for the current moment. We got a powerhouse a little bit next up, which is not something that I would have expected to say about this. Dare I say, hold on, I got to think about this one, guys. I mean, we got Yularen up, Yularen Red. Everyone knows, everyone sees. It's in your face. It's in your face. This guy has done some exceptional work. I mean, you've just got some really, really awesome additions in the format, like BT1, 000 as great options to kind of curve out with. Then you've got cards like Sudden Ferocity, Haymaker's usually an addition that people run, and it just does incredible work. Incredible work. You just have a really, really nice curve out. Aggression is very, very strong of aspect. You've got aggressive negotiations to close out the game very, very quickly. You've got craving power, which is great interaction. You just have a really, really nice combination of cards that you can curve out with. High Singer can give you that really, really aggressive start, especially if you got like Imperial Dark Trooper on turn 1. Ziton Moj gives you a little bit of reach, and Ziton Moj is very good in this deck because of the action cheating with Yularen. Plus, you've got the strong plot cards, like I mentioned, Sudden Ferocity and Chancellor Palpatine. S tier? I'm gonna put him in S tier. You know, I think if you play Yularen, you know how against Yularen and as Yularen, you know how just dumb some of the turns can be. You're sitting there, you're like, okay, I can plan around this. I know he's gonna do this action, and then you're like, I just can't come back because next turn, even if I deal with a couple units and I'm able to stabilize after I'm able to kill some of these units off, it's just I cannot stabilize because next turn, they're going to attack with Yularen and then attack with a second unit. And that's immediately like 9 damage. And if they have aggressive negotiations, that's going to turn like 14 damage, right? And you just cannot beat the amount of action efficiency that Yularen has. And that's a really, really compounded with the really, really powerful events that you have and a lot of the new units. This guy is just incredible. Now, I will say, this is one of the most popular, really, really good win rate, really, really good top 8s positioned. I think he's at the lower end of S tier, but I think he is in S tier. And he is performing quite admirably. Very, very strong list. And I'm very happy with this one. As you know, for those of you that have watched the channel for a while, Leia was the very first video that I made. And you know what? She is very similar to Yularen. Has that 4-powered attacking component, has the ability to attack with multiple units. It's almost like the villainy version of Leia, really. I mean, you know, in Yularen's case, is a little bit more restrictive because you have to use the cheaper units, but realistically, you're gonna curve out. So you're always gonna have a cheaper unit than one of the other units that you're attacking with. And therefore, it's not really a restriction. It's just kind of an action to hit with 2 units, which is really, really strong. Yeah. All right. I'm doubly convincing myself of the S tier pick here, but Jabba alongside the set 7 Leia are our starter decks, the ones that we initially got to see. This is the current iteration of the newest leaders, and some of these are extremely powerful. Not to mention that, you know, these are going to be the leaders that people try to experiment the most with. We've already seen, you know, a lot of other leaders be tried out. Now, this set did hallmark the rotation, the first iteration of rotation. So there has been a little bit more experimentation across the board. But I'll say a lot of these leaders, people are just trying for the sake of, okay, new leader, I got to try it in the tournament, huh? And Jabba is kind of one of those. He has really not been performing well. You know, I've seen a couple different combinations of him. As with that experimentation, there's only like a few people entering him into tournaments. Data Vault / 30 HP base is kind of what people are playing with. And honestly, if I'm going to go 30 HP base, I'm almost always going to go Data Vault just because the extra 3 HP really matters. But I mean, the performance of this has been one of, if not the worst I've seen out of any of the like experimentations going on. Like a lot of these C tiers are in that experimentation category where people are just bringing it because they're their pet decks or whatever. And their win rates are, sub 50%. Jabba's across the board, across a lot of the tournaments that are being taken, are taking place, 25% win rate. And this is across like a larger sample size than some of these C and D tier leaders. And the problem with this guy is the fact that you have to bounce your units to get credit tokens. You do not want to be in a spot where you are tempoing, like, removing your own tempo advantage for resources, especially when you compare it to some other leaders here. You are just going to get completely overwhelmed, especially since a lot of the value of Jabba comes in his flip variant. and you just don't have the proper cards to really take advantage and abuse your opponent's space arena with the ambushing components of it, right? You just can't, because you just don't have the cards pool to pull from. This guy, I just think he's D tier. I do not see him performing all that well at all. And I have not seen anyone come up with a good list that I've found. I've tried to play around with him, and it just, like I said, it is really, really obnoxious to bounce your own unit to try to get some ramp going and then not to have the payoff actually pay you off when you do get to the point when you flipped Jabba. That's kind of awkward, huh? Kind of awkward. The client, however, on the opposite side of the spectrum, this is one that people are jumping in and playing around with quite a bit. And we have two different variations here. We've got the client red and the client blue, both of which are very, very strong. The client blue has a little bit more what I'll call durability, because you've got like the shield tokens that are running around. You've got your various different interaction pieces that are a little bit stronger. But the client red is just the straight up more aggressive variant. Now, the more popular one is aggression, but not by much. This is one of the few lists that has a pretty close to even split between the client red and the client blue, and both of which perform pretty well. The client blue, probably the most, X factor portion of it is the fact that you've got your emergency powers. Of course, the client red, you've got sudden ferocity and battle fury, which is a very, very cool one in your client decks. You can really, really rush people down because the client itself has shielded, and there's not really a great way to deal with leaders besides just straight up exhausting them. What ends up happening is you can load up the client with a bunch of upgrades and just go to town on your opponent. You can just go to town on your opponent. And that's exactly what the client red does. And it does it exceptionally well. Now, I think overall, the performance of these decks, the client red has done just slightly better. But like I said, it's dead even. In terms of top 8 finishes, they're literally the same. So if you're going to put them at some point in the meta, they're going to be right next to each other. I'm going to inch out the client red because I do think it has just a little bit more of an aggressive curve and it works pretty well. And, it's going to fit right up here with Daedra. I think Daedra, it's just a little bit worse than Daedra. She is performing just a little bit better. You have a little bit more advantage and ability to draw some cards, interact with units with Daedra. So it's right behind, but very, very close at the higher ends of A tier. So very, very strong list. Very, very strong. Han Solo. This one's kind of on the opposite end of the spectrum, huh? Now, Han Solo, we really have not seen a whole lot of Han Solo. Unfortunately for Han, it's in that specific spot where it's very action intensive because you're creating these tokens and then you're finally using your action, but that action requires, well, an action. Like you actually have to exhaust your leader to take advantage of it, which is unfortunate. The best combination that I've seen this guy be played in is like Han. Well, I've seen different combinations, I should say, but Han Blue is the most common one. And the main reason for that is you just have a lot of the stronger force payoffs in Han Blue in that early to mid game. Now, you do not get like the Yoda at the top end, but you do get the ability to play, your Yaddles, your Ezras, and that type of stuff. Itinerant Warrior, your Chirruts if you're playing that, which is very, very strong. And the reason why we're playing the Force is because this guy requires you to defeat a friendly token to get 1 damage in. And the only way you're reliably doing that is by defeating your Force token. So when you get a couple Force units down, this can be decent because you're getting 1 damage a turn. But that's all you're getting is 1 damage a turn. That's it. That's the payoff. It's not that great. Now, does that mean it's like a C tier? No, I don't think it's quite into the C tier category. Maybe it is C tier. Maybe it is C tier. Oh man, this grouping like Cassian, Luthen, Han. Okay, I'm gonna move Han here, Slimore here, because I do think it's a little bit stronger than Governor Price actually. And And we'll leave it like that. You could argue that these two should be in C tier, and they may end up being. They're very low on the B tier. Very, very low. So we'll leave them like that for now. But now we got a heavy hitter, guys. We've got Lando. And I'm not even gonna sugarcoat it, guys. We're just gonna put all three of the Landos up in the S tier component. You know, each one of these, if you just look at the straight up top 8s across the board, you know, Lando is, all three of them are like within the top 10 to 15 in terms of performance. All three of the variations. This is like reminiscent of like the old Boba days, honestly. And that's insane. Or even like the Han 2 days, right? Now, the most popular is by far Lando Lake Country. So we're going to put that in front. The second most popular tends to be Lando Blue, followed up by Lando Green. Now, Lando Blue is just not a Force version. Lando Green typically is Data Vault. And then Lando Lake Country is just that. It's Lake Country. And we're going to put them at the top of S tier. We've got to. This guy is just absolutely incredible. The main reason as to why is simply for the fact that you have a one cost. Basically, what it says is save a resource for the future turns. And that can be absolutely disgusting. It can. Now, the reason why I think Lando Lake Country is the best in the performing the best is the consistency component. It is so much easier to build Lando Lake Country and have almost a guaranteed activation of your action on leader than it is to build some of the other variations out there that give you the resource. So Lando Blue, you're going to be playing cards that might not have like all heroism, for example. If you don't have all heroism, then you're not going to get your resources every single time. It's just not going to happen. Same thing with Lando Green. Like, people oftentimes play Tree Remembers or Lost and Forgotten, and those are just going to get you out of the realm of having 100% consistency with the action. That said, flipping Lando and then being able to deploy Bo-Katan, or flipping Lando and being able to deploy, you know, like massive command and massive vigilance cards is good. Who would have guessed? And that's what Lando does. Lando Lake Country is more of a tempo-oriented game plan where you're just bouncing every single one of your opponent's units. But here's the thing, you're able to put so much pressure on your opponent with Master Codebreaker because you're going to get a really nice discount on your Faith in Your Friends and Axe Forgets. And then alongside that, put a lot of pressure on your opponent with something like Faith in Your Friends. If you're bouncing all their units and then you're following up with, 2 0-2s that are attacking for 4 every single turn, that ends the game really quickly alongside Roast Tico. So this is the issue. This is the thing that people have to deal with. If you're playing Lando Lake Country, you have this super massive tempo advantage throughout the whole game that your opponent's able to apply pressure with Faith in Your Friends and Roast Tico and just ends the game. And then even if you are able to beat that, well, now you have to beat Qui-Gon, Mandalorian, and Liberty at the top end because of the extra resources. In Lando Blue's case, maybe they don't have like that insane, tempo advantage at the beginning and balancing all your units, but they're going to have stronger units. They're going to have stronger removal and then a top end that's stronger. So maybe not ending the game as quickly, but still very, very powerful across the curve. And then similar with Lando Green, those top end threats are going to be honestly a little bit scarier than a lot of the cunning threats out there in a lot of cases. It's just tough to deal with. Every single thing about Lando is just tough to deal with. So they're going to end up in the S tier. And by far, one of the most played lists and actually just straight up the most winning list. So I'm going to put him at the top of the list because even though it's not necessarily as popular as like an Obi-Wan or Boba across the whole meta, it's won far more across the entire sample size out of those 3 lists than Obi-Wan or Boba has. Boba's got like a 54% win rate, for example, and Lando across all 3 versions has 56% win rate, which is disgustingly high for a leader. It's disgustingly high in terms of a competitive sense. So yeah, it's got to be S tier, straight up. And spoiler alert, probably just the best deck in the format at the current iteration of it. Now we move on from Lando to Hera, which, honestly isn't as bad as I previously would have put the Heras that we've seen in the past. Vigilance, Command, Heroism is a strong combination. We do have a split on what Vigilance actually means for Hera. There are decks that are running your Force combinations of cards, and then there are decks out there that are running just straight, splash base. So you can play the Kanans and the Zebs guaranteed, even if you do get disruptive and don't have those units on the board. What we found is, if you're going to be playing the splash bases, you need cards that you're willing, in essence, to pay that extra 3 life. And in Hera's case, you could play the Force synergies and then play the Spectre cards that are worth splashing for free, essentially. As long as you have one other unit on the board, which isn't too difficult. When you deploy Hera, you've got those 2 units. You can play Kanans, Ezras, Zebs, Sabines, all in your deck, and all of them are good. Sabine getting those upgrade hate, you get an Ambusher as well. Zeb coming down as a 4/4 Sentinel that deals 5 is incredible. Kanan as a 4 resource 3/4 Restorer that also bounces a 4-drop is insane. By far the strongest of those options. She isn't very winning, but she's very popular. Not a lot of these B and C tiers aren't very winning on the global stage of things, but I think she fits somewhere around the mid to higher end of B tier. Again, Ezra, Kanan, Zeb, those are the cards that you're wanting to look at and wanting to incorporate into your deck. Those ones are the ones worthwhile to play for you. Outside of that, yeah, just not a whole lot of value being generated. Leia, similar structure. We've got Command, Heroism, Vigilance. Leia really utilizes the splash base more than anything. You're not going to see the Force variant. This one struggles, though. This one, this one certainly struggles. One of the lower win rates across the board. And that typically ends up being that, your whole game plan is to play a bunch of units that are different aspects. Your opponents know that. They know Ezra's coming. They know Kanan's coming. They know Zeb's coming. Similar to Hera, it's very face up, right? And in Leia's case, it's even more disruptible. And you only have like a one-shot thing. You're playing all these off-aspect cards to make Leia work. And then, once that one time you play that off-aspect card happens, you're still down to 3 HP and you don't have any other, really powerful things going for you. Counters on Leia aren't bad. You can be a little bit aggressive, but I think she ends up somewhere in the C tier category. I don't think she's like absolutely atrocious. You can do some interesting things and you can put a lot of pressure on your opponent if you happen to have the right draw, but that's kind of the idea. This is one of the least consistent lists on this tier list, simply for the fact that you're playing all these different aspect combination cards and you don't actually have the ability to play them all for cheap like you do with Hera potentially. Darth Vader. Definitely one of the more fun lists on this tier list. This one is kind of that one-shot kill type of game plan. You do have a lot of controlling elements to the deck. Tree remembers no glory, lost and forgotten. Typically, single reactor ignition is a card that you're playing. But you also have a really nice early game curve potentially. Chio Fein, 000, BT1 is not uncommon. Hana, all of those cards are something that are typically played in your Darth Vader lists. And then, of course, as we all know, most of the time this is an aggressive negotiations, maybe not like the full 3 of, because you're going to get so late into the game. But once you've deployed Vader and you go for the aggressive negotiations, you kind of one-shot. And even if you don't have aggressive negotiations, you can really pump in some damage to your opponent. I mean, that is a 6-8 stat line. That is a lot of stats coming at you and swinging at you. And then throwing extra cards at you is really, really tough. This is not something that's like overwhelmingly powerful at all. This to me is like a quintessential B tier list where you have a really, really nice killing X factor, but not quite enough to, close out the game early enough. And that leads you down some pretty rough positions. Sebulba. This is a fun one. Very disruptible because you've got so many different things to interact with. Very aggressive. But I will say, Sebulba Cunning is really the only option. This is nowhere near to Sabine, for those of you that remember. 2/5, raid 1, essentially stat line. In Sabine's case, you're just dealing 1 damage, which ends up being usually better for the aggressive decks. You bypass those sentinels. The whole game plan around Sebulba is trying to get those discard synergies, but unfortunately, there's just not a lot of them. And on top of that, you have to use a lot of actions to make it all work. Really, You're looking to power up Sobulba with some sort of upgrade. Battle Fury, Set of Ferocity. You've got some events like Aggressive Negotiations to kind of get in some extra damage. Cunning gives you access to some interesting cards, like the Black Sun Patroller, Volt Scarus' Defender, which is really, really nice in this deck because it's a 3/3 shielded. You do have access to, 000 BT1, that type of stuff, all of which are good cards. Like, nothing about this list initially is like, oh, that should be a problem. But what ends up happening is you're so easily disrupted that you can't really use your action at all. If you're not using your action, then all the discard synergies go away. And then even the biggest payoff to play Sobulba, the Sobulba's Pod Racer, is so easily disrupted because, again, the game plan is you want to put those upgrades on like a Sobulba's Pod Racer and then reset it. But your opponent knows that, so they're going to have cards for it. Almost every deck in the meta is going to have cards for it now. And this deck has had a hard time closing out games. It really has. You put in a good amount of damage in the early game, but nowadays, units are such high statted cards that, your Sobulba just dies. There's so many cards that just kill everything so quickly, especially with credit tokens. Think about it this way. Your opponent, if they're playing Lando, could easily go turn 1, the Commence Patrol to create an X-Wing and then discard a card. Turn 2, they play a 4-resource play. Let's say they're playing Lando Green, for example. They just play a Captain Typho on turn 2. Game's kind of over. It's just kind of over for Sobulba. There's not a whole lot that you can do. And even if you do have a game plan against you got 000, you attack a couple times. Well, guess what? Your opponent's going to have a whole nother turn to kind of get back in the game. This thing, even though it's actually one of the more popular lists because people love trying to get in their aggro, and I respect it because I do as well, it is one of the lowest win rate lists we have seen. It is incredibly low. I mentioned earlier that, cards like Jabba were close to 25%. Sobulba is low 30s. It's really, really unfortunately weak. And it just goes to show you how strong that deck really is in the grand scheme of things. You just get outvalued, and your opponents aren't struggling enough to where it warrants you being able to speedrun them. You don't have that killer X factor that Kylo did, for example, where you're able to smack someone for 5 and then have the disruption of Force Throw. You just don't have that kind of combination, and it's a little bit unfortunate. On another note, another really early game leader, we got Chewbacca. This one mainly in the yellow variants, but every once in a while you'll see the blues out there. Yellow is by far the most common, and then you do have the blue variants that are using the unique rare base, the Alliance Outpost, I believe it's called. And the Alliance Outpost is actually pretty good in this list, mainly because you're able to basically create yourself a credit token to get to your Chewbacca even earlier. And the blue variant is a little bit more all in on Chewbacca, I would say, because you've got all of this set up to try to get Chewbacca down early. You do have nimble prowess. You've got diplomatic immunity, which is interesting since you can really prevent a lot of damage to your Chewbacca, right, by giving those units -2/-0. That's kind of the game plan. And then you also have mastery, potentially moral authority, that type of stuff. But really what comes down to it is Chewbacca yellow. And I keep talking about this, but maybe I have to go drop in Chewbacca blue here. So, similar to the Jabba. Maybe I'll have to include Chewbacca blue here in just a moment, by the way. But as I'm talking about this, know that these two are very, very strong. Chewbacca yellow is more, using the action to get some advantages, dealing damage to your units, and just kind of keeping you off the board, and then deploying a Chewbacca at some point being very, very difficult to deal with. These lists are very, very strong. It's one of the more played ones. I think I'm going to have to put Chewbacca in the S tier, maybe high A tier. I think Chewbacca yellow would go into the S tier and Chewbacca blue would go into the A tier. I think Chewbacca blue is a good amount worse, since you are able to, especially against Landos, you can go all in on Chewbacca and then your opponent just plays Qui-Gon and it's okay. I guess I'll lose Chewbacca, right? There's not a whole lot that you can do about it. Even diplomatic immunity probably won't allow you to keep Chewbacca around since they've already probably taken some damage with Backed by the Hutts or whatever other card that you're hitting Chewbacca with. So let me add Chewbacca blue and then we'll continue onwards with the rest. Absolutely scuffed streamer, by the way. Not even including Chewbacca Blue. Yes. I know. I apologize. I don't know why I didn't include that. I knew I was going to talk about Chewbacca Blue, and then, of course, I come by and I'm like, yeah, we got to add Chewbacca Blue to this. So, like I said, I'm sure there's going to be a couple of those on this list, as we've already done with Java and Chewbacca. But I think this is where we would put them on the list. I think Chewbacca Yellow just has a little bit more consistency, and not so much of an all-in strategy that really folds to a few different card combinations out there that are not uncommon. It's not like, oh, okay, the Qui-Gon, yeah, sure, that deals with Chewbacca Blue super easily, but it's not like everyone's gonna have Qui-Gon. Well, guess what? All three of the most played decks in the format right now are all Qui-Gon decks. So, and the full three of as well. Just to give a little note there. We got Enfys Nest next. This one is definitely one of the more fun ones of the new set, in my opinion, at least. And we do see, really, this is another one that technically does have a list like Enfys Nest Blue that is played, but it's not good enough for me to warrant putting on the list. And, Enfys Nest Yellow already struggles. Enfys Nest Blue struggles even more. So, similar to, some of the other lists, while it's more like a 70-30 split where 70% is Enfys Nest Yellow, it's just not good enough. The really biggest problem with this combination, and by the way, these are usually splash basis. They're playing like Kanan in there as an example, or Zeb, oftentimes both in the list. This is really conducive of a lot of your strategies are face up. Targeting computer on your indirect damage dealers, getting to double up the on attack triggers is nice, but unfortunately, a lot of those units are just individually a little bit weak on their own, and that ends up causing you a little bit of trouble. So not a terrible list by any means. Another list similar to Sebulba, which really just has a hard time winning. And for that, I think we've got to drop her a little bit further down. I think more closer to like a little bit higher than Sebulba, because they've had a little bit better of an experience here. But yeah, just struggles to close out games. Turns out that just having, a combination of cards that doubles up on attack triggers, you just don't have that many great on attack triggers to actually go for. Like if you're playing like the 2-drops that Enfys Nest are meant to work with, you really don't want to be playing like a 1-4. Like, not very strong at all. Or you don't want to be playing, your what's the other card? The other 2-drop, Weasel. Yeah, you don't want to be playing those cards in your deck typically. Saw Gerrera, on the other hand, another one which is very, very interesting. The first one of its kind that has 2 aspects. Another one which a lot of people were excited about. We did have a decent conversion with Saw Blue, and that's the one that people have kind of settled on as the strongest. And it really comes down to the fact that, you've got some really, really good early plays. Han Solo, Leppy Lookout, Lats. You've got Honor-Bound Partisan, Benthic 2-Tubes, all of which are very, very good. And a lot of those are specifically meant to work with Saw, so you have like death triggers and things like that you can take advantage of. Here's the thing, you're still defeating units to get in damage. And, what's funny about it is there's a lot of other decks that can just put in a lot similar amount of damage, but without having to defeat your units. Now, in some cases, it's fine because you're going to trade in with a Sentinel anyways, and you get some free damage plus Overwhelm, which is nice. But that's not typically the case. So while this has some conversions in terms of like wins, the overall performance of Saw Gerrera has been pretty poor. And similar to, like I said, Enfys Nest, Sebulba, like a lot of these C tier lists. So I'm going to keep him right where he is, actually. I'm going to keep him near the bottom of B tier. While he is a little bit more popular than some of the other B tier lists here, the performance has been just very, very weak overall. Even though we do have like a Saw Gerrera popping up in top 8s and stuff, because people love to talk about that. Even though that happened, it wasn't really a consistent occurrence. It was kind of a weird one of. We've got Aura Sing next up, and this is one that people have been jumping into quite a bit lately. We have 2 variations here. We got Aura Sing Green and Aura Sing Red. Now, my immediate thought was to play Aura Sing Red. When you think about it, you got like no disintegrations. You've got Some other, red cards like Devastator and Persecutor at the top end, which can be really, really nice. It just kind of made sense, right? And that pairs really well with like Lawbringer, Cantwell Rescue Cruiser, that type of stuff. But on other notes, if you're going to play a more controlling deck, what's also very good? Data Vaults. Latz-Razzie is really good. You do have Craving Power. You do get to play big cards like Purgle King. And just Command gives you the interaction in the early game through units that you otherwise did not have, and some really nicely sized units as well. Things like Lats are suddenly so much powerful when they can kill a 4 toughness unit, right? And they absolutely can. You play, your opponent attacks for their 2/4, like BT1, let's say. You play Lats, you hit it for 3, you kill it with Aura. Then you have Lats as a 3 powered unit to potentially hit something else and kill with Aura as well. And this entire time you're using Data Vault to kind of back you up. And then you've got like Bosk, which is an incredible unit to kind of control the board. Eager Escort Fighter in the top end. Yeah, Aura Data Vault is, in my opinion, and just the actual performance of it, just stronger. In terms of wins, comparatively, Aura Data Vault is better than Aura Red, but both of which actually have converted pretty nicely in terms of wins. Now, I think it's actually a decent jump, though, comparing the two. Like, I think Aura Data Vault is significantly better. We're talking, like, if I were to compare between the two, maybe these Landos have to move a little bit further down. The Lake Country is probably up there, but maybe I'll have to change some of these out, because I think Aura Green is probably around here. Oh, it's better than Blue Chewbacca, huh? It's better than Blue Chewbacca. Yeah. It's better than Blue Chewbacca. I think, honestly, Aura Green actually ends up maybe at the bottom of S tier, high A tier. I think I'll put her here. And then Aura Red. Aura Red is closer to, like, the client. Like, somewhere around here. That's where I would put them. And I think, just as a little note here, it's so tough. It's so tough. Now, while I'm at it, I'm looking at this S tier right now, and I'm like, I feel like maybe this is the case, but we'll have to adjust this. We'll just have. I think this is fair, actually. I think this is fair. Maybe even this. I think Lando Green is the weakest of the three in terms of overall performance. So that's where I'll put Lando's, even though I think, Lando's insane for having that many leaders at the top end. Let's keep it like that. Okay. So I'm happy with that. Oh man, this list always gets tricky at this point. It always gets tricky. Okay, we got Jin next up. This one is an aggressive negotiation list. Certainly drawing a bunch of cards, being able to filter, all very, very strong things to be doing. Especially when you've got very, very big payoffs like the aggressive negotiations or Ray. Ray is another really, really nice component to this list that allows you to kind of get that little bit of X factor involved and do some work from that regard. Initially people were super high on Jin, and I was lower than what I should have been. And then I kind of met in the middle, and I was like, yeah, Jin's actually pretty good. And, it turned out that she was just kind of okay. That's where it ended up being solidified. She was just kind of okay. A lot of people were trying to play her, but she actually didn't have that great of a winning record. It turns out that, drawing cards and things like that, you can do the aggressive negotiations kind of game plan or strategy better in other lists. And therefore, I think Jin solidifies herself somewhere up there. I think she's closer to like, I think actually Sabe's like below the Jabbas, and then I think Jin is below Sabe. I think that's where we'll put them. She just doesn't win all that often. You really, really are streamlining that aggressive negotiations. And Lake Country is a lot of HP to get through. And as soon as you get to the late game, you're not going to be able to compete. Boba, on the other hand, new Boba. Oh, geez, guys. This is the first FET where I'm like, Ew. 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 um, Lots of different variations. Aggression and cunning are similarly played and similarly bad. The fact that you need bounty hunters to get credit tokens, and the fact that you're really not going to get that big of a payoff. This guy's just doesn't have the support is really what it comes down to. You don't have the bounty hunters to pair well. The cards that work with bounty hunters are actually underworld cards that aren't bounty hunters in of themselves. One of the strengths of like Fleet Lieutenant, for example, was the fact that it was a rebel itself. Target Tagger's not a bounty hunter. It's really unfortunate that is the case, because that's really what determines, some of these cards from being playable to, and some of the decks from being really good to unplayable, and some of these decks being very, very weak. And that's what ends up happening. And so I think Boba ends up, a little bit closer to like the C tier category. It's really, really unfortunately not strong. Director Krennic, on another note, we've got kind of a big old powerhouse of a leader, meant to be our new 7-drop replacement for Palpatine or something of that nature, I think. There are different versions: Krennic Yellow, Krennic Blue. Krennic Yellow is a little bit more played, but they're all not good, unfortunately. It turns out that sacking units in the current iteration is just not good enough for credit tokens. When we had Palpatine, we had cards like Super Laser Technician and like V-Wing in the early game to sack without any recourse. In this situation, we don't have those same units. We don't have units that are easily sackable that we really don't care about. And then the other difference is Palpatine, even though it was one turn later, the difference between killing a unit and stealing a unit is massive. Stealing a unit is devastating. Like, okay, you play a Krayt Dragon or a Luke and I take it. Oh my gosh. Like, now, not only do I lose my unit, but I have to deal with my own unit on that opposing side of the battlefield. In some cases, that's going to be impossible. Versus just killing a unit and getting like a decently statted body out of it. Yeah, not even close to the same payoff. Not even close. This guy has not won like at all. It is pretty weak. It's probably solidifying itself in the mid to lower end of C tier, unfortunately. There just hasn't been a conversion for him. There just has not. It's really, really sad, actually, because Krennic was one of the leaders I was looking forward to the most overall. But moving on to Tobias. This one, probably out of all the leaders in the new set, this one's probably the one that surprised me the most. Mainly because I look at this ability and I'm like, what are we even doing? And we're also not in the heroism or villainy aspects. But my goodness, has this guy worked out? It's an aggressive negotiations deck with Chrysanthemum. Those are the two win cons. You play a bunch of other cards. You flip your units. Maybe you've given some other units to your opponents. But really, you just kind of curve out. You kind of just curve out. And then when you curve out, you deploy Tobias. And maybe you defeat a couple of units that you've given them, like the Two-Face Troig. Or maybe you've given a unit you play Rio to return it to yourself. So you've got a couple credit I can spare sitting around. Defeat a couple of the units. Maybe like it's a Stolen AT Hauler is a great one. So you can replay it. And that's some really nice value. You've essentially gotten 2 credits, drawn a card, and you still have a 4-5 left over. All great. Maybe you go Commandeer, right? Commandeer, and you attack with a unit. You give it back to them, and then it gets back to their hand. Very, very excellent. There's some really, really interesting combinations that you can go for. And then aggressive negotiations plus Chrysanthemum, you just close out the game that way. Just straight up. This guy, surprisingly, very, very, very good performance. Very, very good performance. And the overall strength of this is much higher. This is like Jin, what Jin wants to be, but like much, much better. I think I gotta put him. Oh man. Daedra has a better record, but Tobias is more popular. I think it's a fine place to put what we've got here. I think that's actually totally fine. I'm gonna keep it in the higher to mid portion of A tier. Tobias, really, really quite excellent. Agent Callus. Now, this one's a fun one. For those of you that maybe stopped by the stream, you know how much I love this card, especially when it comes to Eternal formats. Data Vault is the combination that I've been running with him. You do get access to some interesting ones, such as, you know, being able to play your Anakins plus some of the heroism cards like Kanan or Zeb if you want to. I've also seen like some bigger plays like later on in the game, you know, your Qui-Gons, maybe it's Bo-Katan that you're playing in the list. Really, he's kind of weak. He's a 5 resource 3/6. You pay 1 extra for these cards that, you know, while they are good, you could just play the decks that they're meant to go in. And the pairing of like, oh, I play the villainy side of things with the heroism random cards just really doesn't work out. I've seen some more controlling versions where you're just playing a bunch of controlling effects because you can play whatever you want in Agent Callus, and that's kind of interesting. Like, single reactor ignition is 9 resources, Rhydonium detonation is 8 resources. You can play like Beguile for 4 or Axe Forgets for 3. Not exactly what I would be wanting to do, but I've seen it. He is pretty unpopular and doesn't really win all that much, but there's nothing bad necessarily to say about him in terms of like, he's kind of one of those leaders where he is completely dependent on what cards are available. Kind of similar to Hera, except Hera, you know, hey, I'm going to have you play units, and then I have to have you play heroism units as the payoff. So somewhat dependent on card pool. Callus is just whatever cards are in the pool, if they're good and they're worth 1 extra resource, Callus is good. But you need to have those cards, and we don't in the set right now. I think that's where it becomes a lot more interesting in like Eternal format. So Callus, gonna go into the C tier category. And that's gonna be Lawless time, guys. Next up, we've got Legends of the Force. We get to dive into Legends of the Force with, of course, my favorite leader, Darth Revan. This one's kind of interesting. Honestly, I would say that there's a best deck, but there really is not. There's not a deck that really wins at all. These guys just completely fumble the bag with Revan. I am hopelessly disappointed. Blue is like the closest you'll get to kind of doing something. The problem is that all your units just straight up are too squishy to go ahead and actually get that experience token on the attack. You're missing a secondary aspect, or I guess a tertiary aspect. It's not like Saw Gerrera or anything like that where you have like 3 main aspects. You are literally just sitting in villainy. So with Vigilance, you now have Vigilance cards and then Vigilance villainy cards, which, you know, doesn't expand the pool a crazy amount, enough for Darth Revan to really get some value. You can randomly win games with Always 2 or like a Darth Revan's plus Constructed Lightsaber plus Mastery on Revan. It doesn't happen very often. This guy, I want to say, when I was looking at some of the data, I believe Darth Revan had like one of, if not the lowest win, not the lowest. Actually, Jabba with the 25. This guy's bad. I'm sorry, guys. Oh, I'm doing it. Ah, it hurts. Ah, D tier for my Revan. Ah. Oh, it's so rough. It's so rough to play. Again, literally the only chance you have in a lot of these games is to load up a Revan extremely high with all the upgrades. There's just so much upgrade hate and so many ways to actually just directly kill a singular big unit like that. Again, I've mentioned Qui-Gon in the past, but there are big Sentinels that you probably have to cut through. Even if you do that, even if you load up Revan extensively, oftentimes, like let's say you're fighting Yularen, your opponent's just going to kill you. Like, they don't care about Revan. Okay, Revan, sure, yeah, load it up. To kill one of my units, kill another one of my units. It's 1 unit a turn, and I'll just kill you with the double action from Yularen. So it's just doesn't work out. I'm sorry, Revan. I'm gonna feel that one for a while. We got Anakin next up, and honestly, this one might even be worse. The only version I've seen Anakin in is Anakin Blue, and that's mainly because you are playing those villainy cards, which do allow you to play the Anakin unit and get the double trigger. That's about the most powerful thing you can do, especially with the rotation. You've lost like all the powerful events that I wanted to play in Anakin. Overwhelming Barrage, Power of the Dark Side, just to name a couple. Those are the cards that I wanted to play in my Anakin deck. And you know what's not existing in Anakin anymore? Overwhelming Barrage and Power of the Dark Side. They don't exist. So a lot of the events just aren't worth playing. Yeah, this guy, we don't even see him at all. He's just a D tier. It's just, I'm sorry. You know, another one which I thought was going to be pretty cool. You're missing that tertiary aspect, like I mentioned with Revan. So you miss out on a lot of cards. There's too much setup. There's too little payoff. It's a D tier. Like, actively trying to go for Anakin typically makes your deck worse. All right. Moving on, we've got Asajj up next. Asajj is a little bit interesting. With Asajj, you kind of have this dynamic of being able to play a lot of ground units that can be potentially pretty strong by damaging them and getting them ready to go. And then having like some pilot synergies by putting things on your piloting units. Really, the most common one I've seen with Asajj has been yellow, but this one's a little bit tricky because the most competitive options has been aggression. So I want to put a little caveat on here. Asajj, the most common one I've seen is yellow, but the most common one, and we're talking about like 1 to 2 decks played, that's it, has been aggression. And so, you know, really, depending on what you're looking at, like that deck has like Shadow Cloaking and like Hunting Assassin Droid, which is kind of interesting. And then the yellow variant has just solid cunning cards that you can play. Either way, you're really not going to perform all that well with Asajj. Most of the plays like Ogdo Bogdo just require a little bit too much setup for you to get a lot of value out of. I guess I've even seen like Data Vault Asajj. This is one where like you could kind of pick an aspect and all of them have this some portions of viability more interesting. I've just found that, you know, going yellow and focusing more into the pilot synergies could potentially get you some more wins and kind of cheese them out more than anything. It's not like you're winning through pure power. And so for that reason, I think I'll put her in, you know, the C tier. Not quite D tier, but pretty mediocre. Oh boy. We're going to run it back with Kit Fisto, huh? I know this is some of your favorites, and I know you guys continuously try to play this guy, and I know that you guys continuously lose with Kit Fisto. The proof is in the pudding. We got Force Base Kit Fisto green here. Really, all you're doing is loading up with a bunch of Jedi. You are trying to get those Force units down, trying to rush your opponent down, and trying to, well, get a big Kit Fisto and maybe deal a little bit of damage along the way. It's pretty straightforward. I mean, it's just kind of a bad Force deck. I don't know how else to put it. Like, aggression command is not really where you want to be anyways right now. Like, if you look at like the majority of the lists here, you're not going to see aggression command as a combination unless you're piloting. And so on the ground arena, you're really missing out on a lot of power by not playing Vigilance. But maybe your 1/6 will do something. It won't. I'm sorry. It's not D tier. I'm sorry. It's like C tier. It honestly, it might even be above Mon Mothma. It's not D tier. I'm sorry. I can't be next to Revan. I apologize for you Kit Fisto enjoyers. You're right. It's not Revan tier, which is like the most painful thing to say in the entire world. But you know what might be Revan tier? Oh, the next one we gotta talk about, Rey. Oh, joy. This one, I have yet to see anyone really try to pull it off. Rey Yellow has been the only thing that I've seen people try, and you are just playing a bad deck. You know, you're playing a lot of these random Force events like Impossible Escape, or you've got like Trust Your Instincts, which is actually probably the best one. Sorceress Blast, which is not terrible. Even like what's it called? The ambushing cunning card that Sheehan Flurry for like Darth Vader purposes, but not Darth Vader in this case. Even that one's like a not a Force card, so you're really limited to like Sorceress Blast, Trust Your Instincts. Like, this is just so much setup to get 1 damage to a unit. 1 damage is what we're talking about. It's not even multiple damage in a single turn. Like, if you're gonna try to do that, you may as well play the new Han, right? The new Han does 1 damage a turn, you know, with attack with a Force unit. You don't have to play any cards. Like, and then the flip is a 7 resource 6/8 that, you know, discards and then draw. Oh no. Oh, no, 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 no. This is one where if you're trying to maximize those force events, like if you're trying to play Impossible Escape, if you're trying to play Trust Your Instinct, Sorceress Blast, Will of the Force, what's another one? Kraya's Whispers, you're making your deck so much worse by playing Ray. And yeah, yeah, we're just gonna. She is like down there, very much down there. Next up, we've got Barris. This is one I actually do really kind of enjoy. It's one that I kind of come back to a lot, simply because there's a lot of combo potential with Barris. You can kind of just win the game outright out of nowhere. Really, with Barris, red is one option, but Barris blue. Honestly, I probably should be putting Barris blue on here because it's the more important one. I just instinctively put Barris red because that's the one I'm used to. But Barris blue with the stronger events in Cunning, especially with like emergency powers, is an interesting one. You've got No Glory. You've got like hyperspace disaster loss. Okay, hold on. Let me make this quick swap. This is just gonna happen throughout the tier list. This is the beauty of it. Okay, this is why it's like a 2-hour long video. Give me 1 second. If you're playing a Force deck, blue or Barris blue and blue in general is just kind of a must-have. You've got Karis in there. You've got like Treyas Acolyte, Secretive Sage, great turn 1 options. Into like Talos' Assassin and Chirrut, which are the amazing 4-drops. And then of course the value of Barris is the fact that you get to play all those events for cheaper. And playing like a No Glory or True Remembers for cheaper can lead to some powerful effects. And of course, like I said, you've got emergency powers. Xian Flurry is also an interesting one because you can ambush things out on curve, which is not something that you normally could do. Like Darth Vader can come down on 6 resources, which is conducive to most of the wins for Barris, to be honest. So yeah, I don't know why I had aggression on here. It was a brain fart moment where I'm like, oh yes, reminiscent of a happy time. Barris blue isn't terrible. It's an okay list. I would put it somewhere along the B tier. Oh man, is it hard for me to put? Here's the thing, Saw Gerrera did well in like one tournament, and people are gonna be like, oh my gosh, Saw Gerrera, why is it at the bottom of B tier and why is Barris above him? But you know what? The performance from that deck has just been mediocre. It has been mediocre, and if you look at like the top 8 finishes for like the entirety of the meta, you're not really going to see a whole lot of Saw Gerrera in there, okay? I know Saw Gerrera is going to be one of those ones that people are going to focus in on. Heck, even, like I said, Dryden has more top 8 finishes than your Saw Gerrera. I've got to put Barris kind of in the middle of B tier. This is one where, like, I like Saw Gerrera. I just, the performance from him has just not been there. I'm picking on Saw a little bit because it's right next to Barris, and I know people are going to talk about the new deck, and people are going to be like, what about that one time? Anyways, this is why we do the tier list, because we are here to fight amongst ourselves, right? Thank you. I'm ready to be flamed in the comment section. Thank you very much. Grand Inquisitor's next up. Well, this one's an easy one. We could all flame Grand Inquisitor together. I love it. Grand Inquisitor, we just don't see this guy anywhere. Blue is the one I went with. Again, similar to Barris because of Vigilant just being the strongest aspect really to go with when you're pairing force synergies together. His ability to shrink down units and then, get in some value attacks here. Not that great. The shielded component is probably the most interesting. I think similarly to the client, this is something that actually ends up being potentially a little bit more interesting. Now, the difference between Grand Inquisitor and the client, one of the things that I completely, it was initially looking at the client was, oh, you're gonna have to create tokens, but shielded units count as created tokens. So like if you just play cards that have shielded, for example, the client himself, you can exhaust things. And that actually becomes a very relevant ability. So the difference between Grand Inquisitor and the client is in that ability. And so because of that, Grand Inquisitor ends up, around the C tier. And the only reason it's in C tier is similar to the client. You can put Aggression or Vigilance together with Grand Inquisitor. I just picked Vigilance again because most people play the Force strategy. You are going to just try to load up Grand Inquisitor and some shielded units and just hit your opponent. You don't quite have as much power as the client as well, which is another factor, right? 3 versus 5. And you're oftentimes ignoring units, which is where Grand Inquisitor's ability is like, that's a little confusing, huh? Yeah, it is a little confusing. Next up, we got Cal Kestis. Ooh,
another juicy one that we can go ahead and flame together, you know, where no one wants to flame Cal, huh? No one wants to flame Cal. But we're going to. Cal Red, the most aggressive variant of it. You could argue like Cal Blue, you could argue Cal Green, some other options. Cal Red is just the one that I've seen do the most work, playing the 25 HP, you know, DL3, gain the 4 space, so that you can actually play a bunch of units and actually get some aggressive starts. You can exhaust things, but the exhaust action is pretty tough to pull off. And then, of course, Cal is a 3/4. A 3/4. I mean, this thing dies to 000. 000 kills this guy. I mean, he's just not going to get in a whole lot of value here. I mean, 000 is like one of the most played 3 resource plays in the game. It just knocks Cal and survives. Oh my gosh, Cal, I am so sorry. This, you know, you were done dirty. Okay. I'll put it above the 0-8. I'll put it above the 0-8. And, you know, maybe the 0-8 ends in D tier and Cal ends up in D tier too. I wouldn't be opposed to that. Now I get to talk about one of my personal favorite lists, actually. That's Qui-Gon Green. This is the one that, you know, I kind of played multiple times back in, well, when Legends of the Force came out, and then again in set 6, and then again for set 7. I don't think going for like the Kanan Zeb is necessarily the correct play, but some people still do it, and I respect it because there are some interesting things you can do with that. Instead, you kind of just play a standard command cunning force list. You've got Blade Wings that you can bounce your stuff into, obviously Kelleran Becks, Qui-Gon's, Yoda's bouncing. Once you get to that late game component of it, you kind of just win the game. And it's one of the reasons, one of the other decks that uses Max Rebo a lot of the time. I've seen some decks not, and some decks that use it. More often than not, they are using Max Rebo. And that's mainly because once you get to the 7 and 8 resource territory, you start taking over the game. You play Yoda, you bounce it potentially. Okay, you've triggered Yoda twice. You get 2 triggers of knocking out units. You get the heal 5, and then you can play a 7-drop, which might be Kelleran Beck, which gets you another unit. Like, that's a pretty incredible turn. And that's the idea. Or maybe you bounce it and you Blade Wing, which bounces something of theirs. That's, again, the idea here. And then you can replay Yoda next turn, healing you another 5, killing something else, and then bouncing it again to do the same thing. That's the engine value that Qui-Gon brings. And it's a pretty popular list. It's one of the most popular ones out there. Its conversion hasn't been all that great, to be honest. That is kind of the component that is a little bit tricky. When I say all that great, I mean, it's still A tier for sure. But I would put it, you know, around the tier of like the client, where in a lot of cases, you are going to be finding yourself getting overwhelmed or not drawing the right cards at the right time, because the deck is kind of a synergy masterpiece. But it does still win, but at that like middling A tier portion. So still a potentially competitive deck that you can use to do some good work. But very, very tricky to pilot. Certainly. Very, very tricky. Kanan Green. Another really, really tragic list. This thing just cannot win games. I think, honestly, a lot of the portion of it is people are just playing the version to really utilize the Spectres, which is the discounted splash base, right? The 27 HP one, to try to utilize Kanan and Zeb, which seems thematic, no? You know, you're playing the Spectres. I'm going to play all the Spectres in my deck, and I'm going to go ahead and get a lot of value out of it. That would make sense, wouldn't it? That would make sense, would it not? Yeah, you know what happens is you get screwed over because you have 6 less HP than you potentially could have. And then, of course, you play one of those cards, and maybe you get a little bit of value out of it. Instead, I've been playing the Data Vault version. I think it's a little bit better. You can even play the Force variant, and you could get a little bit of late game powerhouse going on there. This guy, in terms of what it's done so far in the meta, has been completely dumpstered. It's again on that like Jabba tier, but again, that's just people trying to use the splash base because it's fun. I again think Data Vault is potentially a little bit stronger in most matchups. If you do draw the Kanan, you have a good matchup for it, then the splash base can make up that 6 HP difference. But I still don't think it's much better than anything around there. It's still like the bottom of C tier, but I'll climb him out of D tier for now. Morgan Elspeth. Now, this is one that's been interesting because Morgan is one that, needed keywords. And, cards like Black Sun Patrol, which may be very simple, 2 resource, 2/2 shielded, initially are like, okay, this is good. And then in Morgan Elspeth, it's suddenly really, really strong because this can allow you not only the shielded component, especially because, you've got the ability to survive, which Morgan needs, and then the keyword, which you can pair with other options. So when you look at like Morgan Elspeth and you're like, okay, what keywords can I combo together to get some really good, resource generation going? It's cards like Black Sun Patroller. You could like curve Black Sun Patroller into potentially Shuttle or Count Dooku or Darth Tyrannus, I should say. Like those types of curves can be pretty nice. And you also have, if you're playing different other cards like Aura can curve into different raid cards, like that type of stuff. The more keyworded cards that we get on turn 1, especially, and turn 2, it really enables the rest of it because there is a good amount of cards to pick from as you go along the curve. It's starting the game that's really tricky. Does this mean that you actually can do some good work with Morgan Elspeth? Not really. It's still very action intensive. You still have a 3/6 on the flip side. You must get some sort of value from the keyword, ramping you a little bit. And if you don't, Morgan Elspeth has done absolutely nothing. And there's a lot of times when your units just get bounced because even though shielded works against normal damage, your units get bounced. So I'm going to have to put her, again, it's in this tier where it's like niche strategies that get completely screwed by the meta, but might be particularly powerful if the interaction in the game right now didn't exist. And that's where a lot of these leaders end up being. Snoke is the next one. This one's an interesting one. Snoke Red is the one I chose mainly because, it's got BT1. It's got 000. It's got some really nice villainy plays in the early game. To be honest, though, I've seen like Snoke Lake Country. I've seen Snoke Blue. I've seen Snoke Yellow. I've seen Snoke Red. I've seen all the variants. Snoke Red just happens to be the one that I've experienced the most strength out of. I wouldn't blame you if you were to put Snoke Blue on this list with like emergency powers and things like that. BT1 and 000 are oftentimes just good enough to win some games. And then putting some experience tokens on those random cards at random points also can be very, very strong. You do have a good curve out. Imperial Dark Trooper, as I said, BT1, you got 000, you got Chancellor Palpatine in the resource pile when you do flip Snoke. You can go pretty wide. You can utilize cards like Daedra if you need to. There's some cool stuff you can do. There's definitely some cool stuff that you can do. The problem is it's very action intensive and you oftentimes just want to be curving out in a lot of games these days. You're just going to boom, boom, unit, and then you're good to go. The decks that are able to do these like cheaper plays and then get value out of their resource or their leader are decks like Lando, which now they're ramping into further plays or they're getting extra late game value. When you get to late game, and if you're playing a Snoke deck, the experience tokens are just not going to matter when someone drops a Liberty on you and bounces all your experience tokens. You can't just grow a unit out of range. Qui-Gons exist, Liberties exist, plenty of Exhaust exist, plenty of Upgrade Hate exists. So even if they just get instant event value on defeating some upgrades, that's going to happen. So I think Snoke's in a tough spot. I don't think he's necessarily bad by any means. It's just, this is not a leader that I really have found to be all that strong. It's much different than Leia, where, okay, I have a spare resource that I'm just going to give out this experience token at a random point. But it can be any unit I have. The other restriction of Snoke, making sure that it is, basically the strongest unit you have, makes it really awkward because your opponent just ends up bouncing that one unit. On top of that, Command, Vigilance, Heroism typically is in a better spot than Command, Villainy, Aggression with later deploy leaders. You just got more power in the deck. So I'm going to put him C tier. He actually has done some pretty good work so far in terms of like winning percentage, but I don't think that actually matters because the sample size is extremely low, similar to some of the other lists here. Avar Yellow, this one's been a very, very fun one to incorporate into the videos and streams. For those of you that come around for these streams, oftentimes you would have seen us play some Avar. You got Max Rebo. This is probably the quintessential Max Rebo deck. Similar to Qui-Gon, you are just trying to get to that late game to get to your big force payoffs. Yoda is a really excellent one. You've got Liberty, you've got Qui-Gon, you've got Mandalorian, you probably have Rey in your deck, all of which are very, very good. But more importantly, you actually have Avar herself, which comes in. And this also can do some pretty solid work. She is an 8/10 if you are playing the Force base, which you are, and that can just win games on its own. An 8/10 overwhelm, kill a unit, hit their base, kill a unit, hit their base, kill a unit, hit their base. And that's enough to put pressure on while killing your opponent's units so that you can actually get your Yodas set down and all that other stuff. Double Cross is a really interesting card in this because you can pass around like your Max Rebo and potentially get credit tokens back or just take their big thing. And then Max Rebo still does the same thing for you than it would have on their side of the battlefield, right? So there's some really cool stuff here with Avar, and I think she ends up kind of at the top of B tier. Not necessarily like incredibly strong, definitely like on the Leia Jin level, or like around that tier, but I think slightly worse. So I'm gonna go ahead and put it in the top of B tier for the current moment. Okay, now we get to talk about a juicy one. We got Obi-Wan Kenobi, blue. Now there are the Virgin's Temple decks, and there are the Force-based decks, the ones that generate the Force on attack. I would say it's more like 70-30. Maybe like 75-25, where 70% of the decks are playing the Force space, and then 30% of the decks are playing Virgin's Temple. Virgin's Temple has a big downside, which is it is 25 HP. Even the difference between 28 and 25 is huge, but like you could be playing like a 30 HP bet deck, or if you're comparing to like Lake Country, which is some of the most popular out there, you're missing 9 HP off the top. That is insane amounts of HP. So you better be having a deck that can really make up for it. And to be honest, the regular Force base can sometimes be even more advantageous, especially with cards like Chirrut or, cards that might want to be using the Force multiple times in a turn. You do have Yoda's lightsaber in your deck. You do have Chirrut. You do have Itinerant Warrior. You do have Obi-Wan's action. So there's many games where Virgin's Temple is just a bottleneck because you can only generate the Force once. So I do prefer the Force base one. And this is just straight up S tier. It's an S tier list. It's right up there. Behind Lando, I think it actually has a pretty bad matchup into Lando because of all the bounce effects, and the destabilization of your board means that you can't really get a foothold and start generating the Force, which Lando's very good at. But very, very solid win rate with one of the most high sample sizes in the game right now for competitive tournaments. It just does excellent work. Putting a experience token on all your sentinels that come down, or just on strong units, having the rush down factor of Yoda's lightsaber or constructed lightsaber plus the restoring component allowing you to just load up Obi-Wan and win the game that way is an interesting one. You have Protect the Pod as good removal, and you do have some late game potential if you do want to go for like Yodas and stuff, which many decks do. So very, very strong in that regard. We got the other pinging unit from Legend of the Force. I guess I should say necessarily other pinging unit, but I'm thinking of like Asajj when I was thinking about pinging unit. We got Darth Maul. Darth Maul is not too bad. Again, similar to your Obi-Wans, there are two distinct versions of this. There's the Virgin's Temple one and then the Force-based one. I'll say that this one, though, it's like 10%, 90%. 90% of the lists are playing the Force-based one because the extra 3 HP is just too brutal to leave behind, especially when you've got a 6 to deploy leader as well. This guy hits hard, though. 5/6 as a 6 deploy is a lot of damage coming in. Not only that, but you can really take out a lot of units in the space arena, for example, when your opponents are deploying units and you're just going along and dealing 1-1, 1-1, 1-1, 1-1. That is tough to beat. This is no longer a deck where you're like utilizing Ogdo Bogdo, for example, to try to get ground unit change. It's just about I play my ground units, I play a little bit restoring maybe, and I just take advantage of the fact that I have the immense amount of potential damage to bring. Marin is a common one. You've got Arvel that people are playing now because of the credit tokens. Tal's Assassin is great as well. You're just sitting down, ping your unit, play Arvel, ping your unit, play Tal's Assassin, kill your unit, and that's the game plan. That's it. It's pretty straightforward. You do have some nice removal effects like Tree Remembers. Deno Disintegrations is a great one in this list. That plus, the Darth Maul ping can knock out things. Nimble Prowess allows you to get a little bit of tempo advantage. not necessarily a too complicated list. You even have the Sun to close out a game or two. This one is definitely A tier. Definitely A tier. The question is, do I put it on like the client level? I'm feeling like it's just behind that. I'm feeling like it's just behind that. Yeah. Yeah, we'll go like mid to low A tier. It's performed pretty well. It's got a pretty good sample size. The win rate overall isn't like amazing, but it's done some good work. It has definitely done some good work. Next up, we've got Third Sister. This is one that we really have not seen a crazy amount. There are a few people playing it out there. Third Sister, yellow seems to be the one that I see the most, but there is a lot of people running Data Vault. Data Vault is very, very strong. Really, Data Vault just offers you more HP. Like, literally, if you look at a lot of the lists out there, it's really just because of the HP differential that makes it a lot more possible. But yellow has that killer instinct factor where you've got a little bit more damage potential. Ascension Cable is one of the cards that we see in a lot of these lists. For example, the client as well, where you can pump in a lot more damage to get past all the sentinels, which I do like. Stolen AT Hauler is another one that's really, really good. Just getting a lot of damage. A lot of the times you deploy Third Sister and your whole game plan is just to load up Third Sister, similar to the client. Now, Third Sister's not as survivable because not shielded, right? But you do have hidden, which means you can't be attacked, which is also good in its own right. Deploying Third Sister, going Sudden Ferocity, Battle Fury will win you some games. 11 power, 7 toughness. They oftentimes can't deal with it next turn. You get an aggressive negotiations or commence the festivities, you win the game. That's pretty strong. Ascension Cable becomes really, really clutch in those Sentinel-based scenarios. You do have like cards like Shin or Urk that come down and have hidden. It's just good, like, in terms of rushing down your opponent. Like, it's the client, but way worse. Unfortunate for Third Sister, I suppose. You know, again, it's not terrible. It really is like just a pure aggro deck. Oh man, and we have seen like the occasional Third Sister pop up. Oh, yeah, I gotta put it like bottom tier. People might flame me because I don't have Third Sister Data Vault on here, and I think that's totally fair. But we're gonna keep the cunning version. We're gonna keep the cunning version. Kylo Ren Green. Kylo Ren. This is one that I have like PTSD over. You know, this is one that I completely lost to and prevented my top 64 in the Galactic Championships. So I have, like I said, a little PTSD over. It was because I'm playing Kira Data Vault. Kylo Data Vault is like the number one matchup I did not want to go against because it's basically my deck, but a little bit better. And it just means that we play these extremely long games where I have a little bit of an inevitability to lose. And that is quite unfortunate. Now, that said, my little story and rant aside, it's not doing so hot anymore. It's not doing so hot. It was definitely one of the most popular lists in Legends of the Force and even into set 6 a little bit, but it has definitely dropped the ball here. It is really not performing well at all. It's just a little bit too slow. 7 resources to deploy ends up being a little bit too late in the game. You don't have the same tier of interaction as you used to. You don't have the same upgrades that you could take advantage that you used to. You still have cards like Craving Power, which are really, really quite excellent, but you don't have as many options, which is one of the problems. You also don't have the ramp, which is one of the things that made Kylo a lot better. Like Resupply and Super Laser Technician were almost necessary for you to survive at certain points in the game. And even the Sentinel body on the ground oftentimes hasn't been mattering in a lot of situations. You know, just being able to go into the space arena and win that way. Yeah, Kylo Ren, truly, truly weak at this point. C tier. Talzin. We got 2 versions here. We got Talzin Yellow and Talzin Red. No Talzin Green, which has always been one that I've had a soft spot for because of like ECL and that type of stuff. You know, there is a small portion of Talzin Green, like a very, very small portion. I don't think it's enough to warrant a third list for Talzin. again, the decision that I'm kind of splicing here is like, okay, do I put Talzin green here if it's like really, really mediocre compared to the other two? Maybe I could see some arguments for it, to be honest. Talzin Green has taken down some lists. If you want Talzin Green on the list, let me know, because you're in the middle of the video now, so you're going to be one of the few people that is actually listening to this. Let me know, and because I'll mention it here. But Talzin Yellow is definitely the strongest of the three variants. They're all force-based. They really utilize different strategies. Talzin Yellow, the two cards that come to mind when I'm thinking about Talzin Yellow tend to be the Stranger. That is an excellent, excellent card. Stranger coming in. And you also have cards like Shin Hati, which are a really, really nice curve filler. You get to go ahead and play Beguile and Xian Flurry. Xian Flurry is amazing with Darth Vader. It's the majority of the reasons why Talzin Yellow is so good. You got the Stranger, and then later on you can curve into Darth Vader with the Xian Flurry. And really the difference between Darth Vader played and then Darth Vader with Xian Flurry is night and day. It just straight up wins games, okay? It just straight up wins games. So Talzin Yellow, it's going to be up there. It's one of the most popular ones, but it hasn't really converted nearly as well as some other lists out there. Before I start talking about like Talzin aggression here, where do I put? I mean, Talzin, the win rate's good, but I think I've got to put her around there. She's kind of on like above the Aura Green tier. So I'm going to put her at the very bottom of S tier. Talzin Red, on the other hand, again, the two cards that come to mind are going to be your Notice Integrations, which with the Talzin action ends up just killing anything. And then you also have a decent curve out like Grand Inquisitor. Arvel is a really nice sideboard card. I'm going to put her around the mid to bottom portion of A tier. If I were to include Talzin Data Vault, or Talzin Force rather, where would I put her? It's going to be closer to like the top of B tier. That's kind of where I would put the rankings of the different variants of Talzin typically. Again, Stranger is an incredible card. It just completely annihilates some games. You know, you ambush, you kill their good unit, you're left with a very, very high-powered attacking unit. And then because you got Talzin deploy, you can oftentimes just completely control the board at that point. And then because your Stranger survived and killed their unit, now you're going to attack their base for like 5 or 6 with that guy, which is really, really relevant. So very, very strong from that regard. And then again, Xian Flurry Darth Vader is really good. Notice Integrations and that type of stuff is good as well, but not quite. And then playing the Force base, you know, with green is just, it's not nearly as good. Now we get to finalize our list of Legends of the Force with Ahsoka Tano. I can make this one real easy, guys. I can make it real easy. Oh. Abandoned ship. It's breaking my screen. She's bad. She's real bad. I put Data Vaults because Force Base because I was like, I guess we are putting green in our deck and we're going to try to win with a Yoda card. That's really it. The Ahsoka Tano, though, is just bad. She just does like nothing. Using the Force to get Sentinels out, like you just should play Sentinels like Obi-Wan and Captain Typho. And oftentimes you are. So like her action does literally nothing. Yeah. We just don't see her. I don't think her action does a whole lot. It's a little too action intensive. All bad all the way around. Kicking us off in Jump to Lightspeed, we've got Kazuda. Now, this one's tricky because there's like one player that plays Kazuda Data Vault. And, well, I should say just one player, but there's one player that's put up good results playing Kazuda Data Vault. So there is an argument to put Kazuda Green on this list. There's also an argument to put Kazuda Blue on this list because, you know, they're kind of split pretty evenly, but Red inches it out as the most popular version. It's also the one that I personally have the most fun with because I think it's cool. It's actually not too bad. You know, if you look at some of the data, it's tough to determine whether or not Kazuda himself is very, very strong, or like there's just one version of this that ends up being pretty good, or a couple of games that ended up being pretty good. I will say it can still be very, very quick with a pilot on a early unit. You do get wrecked by upgrade hate, as a lot of other decks do. It's really not too bad of a list. You can really, really rush down people and have that aggressive curve out with sudden ferocity, of course. Kazuda deploy, you do have a lot of units that you can leverage. Contracted Hunter, Fireball with the Kazuda action. You didn't miss out on a lot with removal of the earlier sets, but Stolen ET Hauler's still there. You don't have Millennium Falcon anymore, unfortunately. That was incredible. A card literally like made Kazuda, in my opinion. I would put him kind of on the tier of like, I can't put him above Saw in this case, but I will put him in the B tier. Very bottom. Very, very bottom of B tier. Next up, we got Poe Dameron. This one, again, you know, you could argue Poe Dameron yellow, but Poe Dameron Data Vault has a little bit more lists attached to it and generally is better performing than the Poe yellow. Also, who doesn't love 3 extra HP? Like, who doesn't love 3 extra HP? I could see a Poe yellow here, but again, they're both like relatively on the weaker side in the grand scheme of things. So I figured only one list was worth talking about. This guy's a much more space-based. You know, you are loading up on a bunch of units, getting the pilot component out from your 1-cost action from Poe Dameron, and you're utilizing that to potentially close out some games pretty quickly. You also just have the eject combination if you do want to run him, as many of the Data Vault decks do. The eject can be pretty strong, but it's not super consistent. So I've seen a lot of people also just take it out purely and then just use like Captain Typho as a ground unit and then sit back on, you know, your space units and load it up with a Chewbacca, play Blue Leader, play like MC30, etc., etc. I would definitely put this a little bit higher on the list. Is it A tier? Oh my gosh. Are we doing that to ourselves? It can't be A tier. I'll put it. I think it's around that spot. Yeah, we'll keep it there. We'll keep it high B tier. High B tier. Admiral Trench. Of course, got to talk about my Trenchy boy. No one plays this guy. No one should play this guy. He's pretty bad. You know, has a deploy that requires so much action. Draws you a couple cards, but it's way too late in the game. You can play like Colossus with him, so you can get 5 extra HP and try to get some advantage of that. Filter your hand a little bit. You just don't have the same payoffs and the same controlling elements to where Trench is like worthwhile playing without like an aura action, for example, to finish off units. You just don't have that same versatility. Just too slow, too obnoxious to actually get some value out of him. I'm going to put him in the D tier. Sorry, Trench. Sorry. You know, maybe a little higher. I could put him above Revan. I could put a lot of people above Revan. I could put Revan at the very bottom of the tier, and I think that is arguable. Rio Lake Country. This is the one that I did play on a video here for you all. There's Rio Red out there. You know, there really isn't any lists that are playing Rio. I just found that the Lake Country gives you that 4 extra HP, and that can be pretty relevant. You're not really missing out a whole lot from not playing aggression. You do have like Battle Fury and Sudden Ferocity, which are pretty good on your space units. But honestly, most of the time you're winning by like playing a Stolen ET Hauler and then dropping your Rio on their face, you know, with the Stolen ET Hauler. And that just wins games sometimes. Pretty simple, pretty straightforward. You know, it's not exactly all that strong. You're not really going to see Rio show up anywhere. It's more of like a C tier list where you have like this space game plan, but a lot of decks also do the space game plan. It's better than Grand Inquisitor. I think I'll put it at the top of C tier. Again, you can just win games from putting a pilot on a space unit. Just is what it is. It just is what it is. But not consistently very strong. Admiral Akbar. I think a lot of people love trying to make this guy work. I certainly do. Data Vault is a strong card, but it takes a lot to get him to work. I've seen a lot of people try some weird things where they're like trying to generate a huge board by playing like some weird cards that generate a bunch of X-Wings for them. I don't actually think that's the game plan. I do think, playing like a more cunning focused list with like Faith in Your Friends as an option, and then playing like a few command cards that make a lot of sense is perfect. Resistance Blue Squadron is a great command payoff. You've got like Blue Leader, which is great. You got like Millennium Falcon, which is technically a command card. You can play Jin. And then I like Queen Amidala and Chewbacca. And then you play a more cunning focused list to where you can play a lot of the cards that generate you multiple units that are actually really good. And then you have like Figure of Unity potentially, or like Fulcrum that I've seen people play, even though I don't think Fulcrum is really that great, as a finisher. It's okay. It's a little slow, and it's a little what I would consider dirtly, but it's certainly not bad. I would put it around like the Kylo tier. I think it's more, well, maybe it's a little bit higher than Kylo. I'll put it at the bottom of B tier. It can get some wins. It can get some wins. Resistance Blue Squadron, off of creating a bunch of X-Wing tokens, off of creating your spy tokens, that can be good. You can pair Axe Forgets and Beguile with it. A lot of lists do. Get that interaction in. And that can be hard to deal with, because you have this one resource that's giving you a unit, put on pressure, and then you have this interaction, which in some cases, that's all you need. Talk about a leader that fell off a complete cliff. We've got Han Solo, the resource generating Han Solo. There's been different mixes of like Han Solo Red and then Han Solo Green with like Data Vault. The Splash Base is another one, and trying to like utilize some very strong pilots like Chewbacca or like even Blue Leader in your space-based strategy. I'm disappointed in this guy. I had much higher hopes, but the performance has just been so bad. Your ability to compete on the space arena is really tough when so many opponents are playing space decks and you have a lot of one drops to try to take advantage of. You just end up losing them. And then, of course, you've got a bunch of pilots like Bo Shek that try to draw you some cards, or like Han Solo or Chewbacca even, and your opponents just bounce them, capture them, etc., etc. And that's pretty devastating. Lots of upgrade hate main deck, which is good for, pilot interaction, etc. Not too many good things to say about Han Solo, other than he's been pretty bad. You can still have some explosive turns, and you can still win the game, essentially like that. But it is much, much harder than it used to be. Much harder. And I think I've got to put him, oh my gosh. It can't be Leia tier, can it? Nah. It's kind of Leia tier. It's kind of Leia tier. Sad. Wedge. This one can bust out wins. Unlike your Han Solo, which tries to go ahead and deploy a big board and then get the Han Solo flip and reset the resources and do it again. Wedge is all about, I play a space unit, I immediately play a pilot to it. If you have interaction for it, I lose. If you don't, I win. So you have some really, really inconsistent games where you are just on it and you're just winning the game. You got your Chewbacca on your turn one space, or turn one you play a space unit, maybe 2 space units, and then turn 2 you just go Chewbacca plus like another pilot, and you're just winning the game. You just win straight up. And then other games, you go turn 1, play a space unit, put a pilot on it, and your opponent goes Axe Forgets. And you're like, oh. And then turn 2, you try to play up a space unit, and then before you can even put Chewbacca on him, on the following turn, you get beguiled. Oh. And yeah, that just continues. So very, very inconsistent games, and it can have a very, very weak streak against some of the meta decks. Even though the upside can be way higher than a lot of lists on here, there are just some game enders, and there are too many of them for me to put them like above the Sebulba tier. The Sebulba tier is like any interaction kind of disrupts my game plan and I lose. Yeah, that's kind of where Wedge is. Next up, we've got a powerhouse, and that's Boba. Now, this is the only leader on the list with 4 decks to his name. Now, I was debating on whether to include all 4 of them. It's kind of like, okay, if I'm doing this, should I include like Talzin? Like Talzin Data Vault on this list? Should I include like Kazuda Green on this list? Like, these are very good questions. Very, very good questions. But this one is actually winning enough to where it's getting to the point of like, okay, they put up the same results as like some of these top A tier lists, And that warranted enough for me to include all 4 of these. That was kind of my like difference maker here. If they're list is an A tier or above, I'll include it, even if it's like their 4th or 5th list. So we've got Boba Yellow, Boba Green, Boba Blue, and Lake Country Boba. Lake Country, S tier. Partially just because it's got 4 HP on the base. It is the most winning leader. It's the most top aiding leader. And overall, it is the most played leader. Now, it has been given a run for its money with Lando popping up in the meta more. So, if you want to put Boba above Lando, I wouldn't blame you. If you wanted to put Lando above Boba, I wouldn't blame you. I'm going to put Boba behind Lando. And the reason for that is pretty straightforward. When you look at like kind of the win percentages of these two decks, since they have such a massive sample size, this tends to start to matter a lot more. Lando definitely is above it. We're looking at 54% versus like 56%. That's a big, substantial difference to where I'm going to put Lando above it. And Boba Lake Country is pretty straightforward in that you are just playing all aggression cards with a couple of just pure villainy cards, utilizing BT1 and 000, and you are just playing out your cards back to back to back, killing your opponent's units. You've got a ton of HP on base, so you can get to that Boba deploy, and then you've got like Topple the Summon on Boba Flip. You've got like Cinta on Boba Flip if you want to go that direction. Like Sudden Ferocity can be a way to go. You just have so much aggressive power if you want it, and then you actually have a really, really nice potential controlling element that you can go for as well. It just hits on all cylinders. On all cylinders. It is really, really tough to beat. What about some other ones? Well, I think the second best version between, Boba Data Vault or Data Vault's Boba Yellow, Boba Blue is actually Boba Data Vault is what I would consider the strongest of the other three. This one's really, really tricky, but the extra 3 HP does matter. What do you get with Data Vault? What do you think you get with Data Vault? Craving power. That's it. This is the reason why people play Lake Country. So the reason why you play Data Vault, or playing Boba Green is you get Craving Power, which gives you that little tiny bit of extra interaction. You do have a couple of other sideboard cards that people oftentimes run. That's oftentimes like the only card that people are playing in there that is consistently played. Some lists are going to run like Eject and try to go with the Eject combo. Some lists are playing like Pirate Snub Fighter main deck versus sideboard. Some lists are playing like Dornian Gunship, which is one that we've seen in the past. It is very, very strong. Some lists are going all in and play like Benthic 2 Tubes, Honor-Bound Partisan, and all that on the ground arena. But all of them are playing Craving Power. All of them. So that's the one consistent thing that you get. And at the behest of 1 minus HP, this is not a bad give and take. Now, you do get a little bit less consistency with your deck because you got 10 extra cards in it, which I think is conducive to try to be in that spot where you are a good amount worse than the other ones. So where would I put Data Vault here? I think there's a big drop off. I would put him kind of around the middle of the pack A tier. And I think Boba Blue is right behind that. Right behind it. What is Boba Blue offering you? Well, you do get a little bit of Sentinel interaction in the ground arena. You do get some really, really nice events. No Glory is included. Lost and Forgotten is included. You usually are playing single reactor ignition because you're doing so much indirect damage that, when you get to that point, you can just play single reactor ignition and it actually will end the game, which is kind of cool. So that's one of the hidden modes of single reactor ignition, which is just ending the game. Those are the cards you're looking for. Much more controlling, much more obnoxious, in my opinion. I'd rather just be Lake Country'd out. And then you have Boba Yellow. And this is one that people were playing, initially. Or like, oh yeah, Boba Yellow is the way to go. You've got like Gorilla Soldier, which is amazing. You have Beguile, and you've got Arrest, and you've got like Black Sun Patroller, and those types of cards, all of which are pretty strong. But you do have 30 HP. And it's similar with Vigilance. You also have 30 HP. It'd be interesting to note if every one of these aspect combinations had 34 HP, which one would you go with? Is that extra 1 to 4 HP that big of a difference? And you know what? Yes, it is. It is that big of a difference. So, where does Boba Yellow end up? This is a great question. I think it's the weakest of them all, and I think it's barely in the A tier. Maybe not barely in the A tier, but I think it's at the very end of A tier. So what this means is you got Boba Fett. This is how you know the leader is strong. You're like, I can mash whatever cards I want in a deck and do well. Like, you know, as I said, there's some lists like Data Vaults that are just running Craving Power, and that's the only modification. It's like, really, I'm just playing Lake Country, right? But that's how you know a leader is strong, is by just playing like Lake Country, so you can play the minimum amount of options available, and you're still so strong. That's how you know a leader is truly powerful. And if you look at some of the leaders here, guess what? The two most powerful, two most powerful decks in the format are Lake Country decks, because the leader is so good, and then the 4 extra HP allows you to enable your deck so much more that you can just run that without any additional cards in it. And for a set to be the first set with multi-aspect cards, for this to be the case, is so ironic. It just makes me smile. Moving on, we've got Luke Green, another very, very strong one, and another one that's going to end up in the S tier. Where do I put it, though? Where do I put it? This one's a tough one. I think, you know, it's gotten significantly less popular over the course of time as we've gotten a lot more lists available. Maybe it's not quite S tier. You know, it hasn't really been performing all or as well as it used to. The win rate on it's actually not great, but I still find the deck to be very, very strong. I initially said S tier. You know, I think, and this might be a hot take. Even though it is one of the more winning decks, it's up there like above Yularen, for example. The overall like play pattern and effectiveness of the deck across the bigger sample size has been so much worse. We're talking like, when I was looking at the numbers, like 47% of the games are wins with Luke versus like Yularen, which is like 52. I think maybe even like higher than that. I don't remember now at this point, but like 52%. I did a whole read up on this before I made this video. I promise, guys. And that's a big difference. That's a big difference. Is it warranted enough to go into A tier? I think it is. I'm going to put him at the high end of A tier. The high end of A tier. And I know that might be toxic to some of you who are Luke enjoyers, but I think this is just one of those things where Luke came out strong and fast because we knew it existed. We knew it was going to be good, and then teetered off as the meta has expanded. And that's pretty rough. It's pretty rough for Luke. So I'm going to put him at the top of A tier for the current iteration of the meta. We got Phasma next up. You guys remember the days when Phasma was winning games? I do. It's not really doing so high anymore. I've seen some people try to play like Data Vault. You know, the loss of ECL, this is one of those decks that really hit it hard. Because like one of the main ways you're winning the games were like ECL Kylo or like ECL Captain Phasma. Kylo doesn't even exist in the deck anymore, which is really unfortunate. Yeah, this one just struggles a lot because you just don't have that killer X factor of like Captain Phasma, like give your unit +4, you know, power, and then you know you've got all that extra damage coming in because of the action, because of the pump that you get. You are just ending the game, and the extra or the loss of 5 HP really doesn't matter. 5 deploy 4/6 is not bad though. It's not like this is like bad. I wouldn't put it above C tier though. It's really not popular. Really not popular. So it's tough to really edge it out over a couple of these other decks. I think I've got to put it like around the Rio level, where it's got like that. I can win some random games if I get the nuts curve with like Captain Phasma. I deploy like my Captain Phasma. I play my other Captain Phasma. I get in a bunch of damage. I deal damage to you with my action and all this nonsense, right? That's the kind of game plan that you really need. And it can certainly happen, and it can just win games for you. So that is certainly true. And I'll have to give Captain Phasma a little bit of credit there. Next up, we got Major Vonreg. This one, again, kind of follows that same space strategy, but just is worse. I put Vonreg yellow as the most popular one. A lot of the times, this guy's just dying and just losing and losing and losing. It's like the Kazuda deck or like the Rio deck, but just worse, like so much worse. The amount of stats that you get on the deploy isn't enough to keep a lot of things alive. The action from Major Vonreg, you play a vehicle first, oftentimes invites you to lose more. Because if you play a vehicle first, your opponent has time to interact, so you don't actually get the damage in, which means that Vonreg's action, the play pattern of it, leads you to lose more games than you would have if you just attacked and not used his action. And then, of course, you are in a situation where you just don't really have the ability to bypass like Sentinels in late game, like Rio might have, or just to choose when to give opponents power. I'm like really comparing it to Rio because it's like similar strategy, right? They're both like space-based decks with a big pilot leader in Villainy that utilize that to just win the game. And Vonreg just does it so much worse, like so much worse. You do have a really early deploy, which can matter against some decks, but a lot of the times what happens is your first unit gets bounced or killed, your second unit gets bounced or killed, and then it's like, oh, I guess I will chill and do nothing. Or, this is a fun one, your opponent just goes, tree remembers. Oh, that's cool. I guess I lose, right? Yeah, that's a very common play pattern. I'll admit, I've played some Vonreg myself. It's similar to Rio, like I said, but it's going to be much worse. It's very, very close or similar to Sebulba and Wedge, where like those interactive pieces just completely crush you. And yeah, surprise, there's a Vel. I totally forgot to put her on the list when I was talking about the new Lawless Time cards. But yeah, I thought about just sneaking her in, but I'm going to do it. Of course, gotta talk about her since, we didn't talk about her earlier. Vel Red. This one's probably a B tier list. A lot of people just load this one up and just assume that you can just defeat Lando because of all the credit hate. And while it is good, especially against Chewbacca, actually, I think Chewbacca is the one that gets harmed by the credit hate more than the Landos out there. You do just end up losing games because you've given your opponent a credit token sometimes. Like, you do just do that. And that can be brutal. You could argue it's like a low A tier. There's also a Data Vault version that runs around. It's a little bit weaker than the red version, especially since you can't run like Arvel. And that's one of the best credit hate cards that you could be playing in your deck. You also have got cards like Charismatic, which are really, really nice to be putting experience tokens on, because now if that unit dies, then you just get that spy token. So it's kind of like a freebie. But yeah, Vel, top of B tier. Now we got Lando. Not the Lando that we are expecting. The bad Lando, the Data Vault Lando that's from Jump to Lightspeed. Yeah. This one tries to use some of the Vigilance command cards that are new and try to fight through with like Leppy Lookout and Lats. And you do have the ability to pass around some shield tokens by going into the space and the ground. The problem is he's a 7 to deploy leader. And he needs to really be deploying on the space arena to have any sort of relevance, to be honest. Yes, he is technically a 5/7 Sentinel on the ground right now, but that's all you're getting from him. It's a lot to get to 7 resources when you have no ramp. It's a lot. And you'll see where the meta has shaped up to be, in a situation where you are just going to be not ramping and you're trying to combat your opponents where your opponents are deploying on 6. Yeah, you are going to struggle a lot and you are going to lose a lot of games. I'm going to have to put this guy. Is he D tier? The shield tokens can be relevant in some cases. It is a little bit tricky to get them rolling. So that is something to think about. He is not much better. He is not much better than Satine. And you know what? We're going to put Satine in the D tier. I'm sorry, guys. I've got to. It's just not good. It's just not good. We've got to put... if Satine's going in D tier, so is Lando. I'm sorry. We got to put both of them in the D tier. I think it's fair. Rose Tico. This one's been an interesting run, or interesting one for me. It's the one that I've been playing a little bit on stream, and and stuff. It's a fun list, and it does do pretty well against like a lot of space-based decks around there, because you have cards that just come out immediately and get you value and then get healed up. Fireball is a great card against these lists. Blue Ace is a great card against these lists. You've got cards like X34 Landspear, which can come out, hit something, and then get healed up. You've got cards like, if you wanted to go this direction, Perimeter RT that you can pump up. You can just kind of utilize a lot of the space units that are immediately ambushing out and getting some value for you, and then dealing with the space units. So nice little strategy there. Specifically, like very, very niche, I would say. Although that niche does fulfill a pretty good role. Like, Boba space deck, very, very aggressive space deck. Luke, another space deck. Those are the decks that Rose wants to be fighting. Especially Boba, by the way, because of the indirect damage. So I'll say because of that, I'll enter out into the B tier, but not really. I don't feel like I can go higher than that, which is crazy because Rose used to sit around the bottom of C tier. So the 4-6 leader stat line is also extremely relevant because you just end the game, and you really do need to end the game. That's one of the issues with a lot of decks out there. We got Piet here next up, and this one's going to be a decent one. Of course, we expected Piet to do some good work. We got some new capital ships. Doesn't really go away. We got Piet Blue and Piet Red. Piet Blue definitely is over the Piet Red, but Piet Red does make it into the A tier, so I have decided to include it. Where do I put it, though? It's in the A tier, both of them. In the A tier. This is gonna be a tricky one. I think Piet Blue is near the top. It's near the top, and I honestly believe it should be S tier. It's just very winning. It's got a very, very good winning rate. It's got a very, very good conversion rate as well. The blue version is really utilizing cards like Cantwell Arrestor Cruiser. You've got Lawbringer. You've got like Fleet Interdictor, all of which are really, really excellent. And you've even got like Director Krennic in there that can ramp out some of these cards that are pretty good. You do have Invisible Hand with less droids than you would if you are playing the aggression version, which is where the aggression version has a little bit of advantage over the blue version. But you do get removal events like No Glory, Lost and Forgotten, which can be extremely relevant. And, deploying Piet, you don't need much ramp, is what you'll realize. You play Lats, you play Droid Laser Turret, maybe you play a Shuttle, maybe you play like MC-30. Corvus is a card that people are playing now. Because you don't have ramp, you just play Corvus, which is the 4/5 Restorer, as a 4-resource capital ship. That's good enough. Like a 4-resource space unit, that's a 4/5 Restore too. Yeah, that's good. Or like the MC-30, which we were playing in the past, a 4-resource 5/5 capital ship with Raid and Overwhelm. That's good enough. And that can just win you the game. So you close out the games very quickly with a lot of controlling elements associated with it. And that can be very, very strong. The aggression version, where would I put this one? I think this one's a good amount weaker. You do want some of those controlling elements because you have a weak to deploy leader in terms of stat line, and you aren't really doing anything but getting down those expensive ships, right? That is the game plan. That said, I do think it's kind of around that Boba tier. It's around that level. And this one, well, as I said earlier, you are utilizing a lot more droids. You've got like Interrogation Droid that people tend to play, DRK, you've got HK. You do have the Imperial Dark Trooper, Gonk Droid, which people play. So Invisible Hand is by far a lot better. This one oftentimes is going to be utilizing Devastator and Fulminatrix as the win cons and Planetary Bombardment. Now, this is much more focused in terms of, okay, I'm going to win the game and maybe control some of your units by attacking. Whereas like Cantwell Arrestor Cruiser and Lost and Forgotten No Glory just kill your unit straight up, and then you can play your capital ship after. So this one is more like, okay, I'm putting on more and more pressure. Whereas, your Vigilance one is a little bit more reactive, and that reaction tends to be a little bit stronger. So Piet, bottom of A tier, still a very, very strong list, and Piet with 2 of them on the list today. We got Vader Yellow. Vader Yellow, another one that people are waiting to see where it's going to be at. Probably the most budget-friendly list on this entire tier list in terms of competitive viability, alongside their price tag, right? This is one that's going to give you a lot of competitive viability with very minimal price tag. As where would I put this? It's an S tier one. I would definitely put it in S tier. I think it ends up like around the Chewbacca tier. Oh man. I'm looking at this and I'm like, maybe Tobias should be higher. Oh, I'm looking at this and I'm like, yeah. Okay, let's make some swaps. I think I snuffed Tobias a little bit. So I'm going to put him at the bottom of S tier. I know we ended up like expanding the list and I mentioned Tobias could be S tier earlier, and then we're going to move Vader Yellow in this bracket with like the Chewie. I think it's above Piet. Is it above Chewie? I don't think so, but I think Vader Yellow kind of fits in that category. It's extremely powerful just to create a bunch of space units, deploy them, pump out more tokens, play Victor Leader, play a Clone Combat Squadron, have the cunning interaction, and then just deal with your opponent that way. As soon as you get one unit down, and if you can interact after that, you are good to go. And it's been a staple since Vader really has been released. Vader Yellow has been just really, really strong. And then we got one last leader in Thrawn. I know you guys just saw the Thrawn Red down there. I had inputted a bunch of images and I realized Thrawn Red when we got to Thrawn that, they were still there. Not really worth talking about. Thrawn Red is a component of Thrawn, but it just really doesn't perform all that well compared to Thrawn Yellow. Really comes down to Thrawn Yellow is actually a force-based game plan. So what's interesting about Thrawn here is what most commonly is happening is Thrawn Red is, okay, I'm going to really go into the when defeated triggers and try to take advantage of those. And then I'm going to splash Legacy Run, which is the strongest of them all. What Thrawn Yellow is instead is I have Legacy Run as really the only when defeated trigger that I'm looking for. There are like a couple others in a lot of cases, like Night Sister Warrior, Owen, right? These are not like incredibly powerful. I guess Owen can be if you're double triggering in a force deck, but you also are playing Chimera literally just to trigger Legacy Run. That's pretty much it. So you're playing the Stranger, you're playing like Karis, you're playing Talzin's Assassin, you're playing Darth Tyrannus. Like you are basically just playing a normal Thrawn or a Vigilance Cunning Force deck, but with Thrawn for Legacy Run. And that can be pretty strong. It's actually done some good work. It's top 8'd, it's won a couple tournaments, but it's barely hanging on into the A tier. It's like at the very, very end of A tier. It really, really requires you to have some of those luckier draws. You know what? Even in that word right there, I'm going to put him in B tier because, when we're looking at A tier, those to me are like, okay, these got to be a little bit like consistently pretty powerful. But like, do I want to be playing Thrawn or should I just be playing like another list that's going to do a lot more with their leader action? Probably another leader that's going to be doing a lot more with their action and their stat line, because in a lot of games, you're just not going to draw Legacy Run. And then Thrawn isn't really doing a whole lot. It's like you might have drawn a second card off Night Sister Warrior, might have drawn a second card off of Owen. But that's pretty much all you're getting. So, like I said, some lists also run like Grand Admiral Thrawn, or like you can run Xian Flurry plus Darth Vader, which is kind of interesting. But again, you could do that in another force list. Like there's not really an advantage for Thrawn because he's literally only looking for those when defeated triggers. So yeah, I'm gonna put him in B tier, and I think that will end out our list. All right, so what do we think? These lists are always videos are always a little scuffed because I make some modifications as we go along, and I also adjust some positions. when I take a look at it and I'm looking at these S tier lists, would I consider these to be the S tier lists? I definitely would. I think the top 3 are pretty solidified. Like, if you're going to ask me, okay, what are the best decks in the format? I would say Lando, Boba, Obi. And I would put Obi Blue up there, and I would put Lando Lake Country and Boba Lake Country. What position each of those are depends on what your preference is, I think. I think Obi-Wan is solidly in the 3rd place, and then I think Lando and Boba are arguing for 1st and 2nd. But if you think differently, let me know in the comments. I think when you look at the rest of the S tier, these are just oftentimes just the most winning lists. They're also very, very strong and can compete against a lot of the other lists in here. There's obviously the double Lando, but Talzin Yellow, Yularen Red, very, very aggressive. Chewbacca fights on an angle that no one else does. Same with Tobias. You have this like killer X factor where like you flip. You've got aggressive negotiations that gets hit for a lot of damage. And then Chrysanthemum. I can't believe I almost stuffed him by putting him in the like high A tier. I mean, it's not like that crazy of a difference like between S and A, but still, it just feels better to put him in A tier. You got like Vader. You got Piet, Blue, Cantwell, Rester Cruiser ends up being a very, very good capital ship. And I think this makes sense. These are, if you look, the top 10 lists. And I think that's exactly what you want S tier to be. Like, one of the best of the best. Top 10, give me them right now. These are the top 10. Funny that Lando has 2 of them, but I think that's just how the meta shapes up to be. When you look through, I think it really gets tricky when you get into like the lower portions of A tier and into the high portions of B tier. I think you could make an argument for a lot of lists. And the same thing goes for like the bottom portions of B tier and the top portions of C tier. Honestly, the power differential between like, okay, let's say Captain Phasma and Rose Tico Yellow is really not that high compared to like Poe Dameron and Boba Blue. Like, that's much more of a power jump, I would say, with the A tier. So, if you were to modify a lot of these C tier picks and the B tier picks, I think I would probably agree with a lot of your arguments. And the same thing goes with D tier as well. Okay. I think this is like the general position of a lot of these. If you're going to argue that one list over another, I totally get it. That's the beauty of the tier lists. I think, though, when you're looking at like the better decks of the format, when you're looking at the S and A tiers, I think in general, this gives a good description of what the meta would look like on average. However, let me know where I messed up, as I'm sure a lot of you will. It's kind of the, hallmark of the tier list videos. I'm just waiting for you guys to tell me what I did wrong, how I did it wrong, and where I should go and, fix myself. But that's the beauty of it. So thanks for watching. It's been a long one. If you really enjoyed, guys, leave a like. Subscribe to the channel. These videos usually take me like a full weekend. Takes me like 3-4 hours to get all the recordings done. Takes me usually about an hour of setup time to get all the images all ready to go. And then it usually takes me about another hour to edit it all in. So if you enjoyed it, let me know, because I'll do more. I do like doing these videos. They're my favorite videos to do, but they take forever. I just enjoy hearing all the reactions from all of you is what I enjoy the most. So thanks for watching. Again, I'll see you off the next one.